Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore, the case of Ronald Jansen. In 2007, a terrible tragedy occurred that still haunts the local community. Fortunately, the perpetrator was caught and is now serving time for his crime. However, the length of the sentence has sparked much debate and raised several questions. Annick van Uytsel, a kind and humble girl, enjoyed spending time with her friends. She excelled in school and had big dreams for her future. On the evening of Friday, April 27, 2007, Annick chose to celebrate the end of the school week with her friends. She attended a Catholic gathering held at a small house in the countryside. Unlike the usual parties that can involve alcohol, drugs, and unhealthy activities, this event focused on providing safe and spiritual education for young people. The attendees ranged in age from 6 years old to teenagers and even adults up to 35 years old, all gathered to sing, play games, chat, and share their thoughts. That night, the atmosphere was filled with joy, laughter, and friendly conversations. Annick, who had been dancing with her friends, forgot about everything else. The party continued until 4 a.m. Afterward, Annick chose to cycle home with her friends. At a crossroads in the woods, they parted ways. In the morning, Annick's parents grew worried when she did not return home or even call. They began searching for their daughter, who was not answering their phone calls. Annick's parents learned that she had left the party at 4 a.m. and had not been seen since. She had not contacted anyone, which was unusual for her. Her family and friends joined in the search for Annick. Desperate to find their daughter, her parents contacted the police. They quickly took over the case and began searching for her. An official investigation was launched to understand the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. The idea that Annick had run away was quickly dismissed. All of her belongings were still at home, and she had not mentioned any plans to leave her parents. Annick had no boyfriend or savings to go out with. She was not depressed, had no conflicts, and had no enemies, so there was no reason for her to end her life. The police questioned her parents, friends, and everyone who attended the Catholic gathering. But no one seemed suspicious, and no one witnessed anything unusual. The police mapped out the route Annick took home that night. They meticulously checked the road, the corners, and all the surveillance camera footage from cameras along her usual route. Unfortunately, there were no cameras in the woods where she disappeared, leaving the investigation without any significant evidence. The police even explored other possible paths in the woods. There was speculation that Annick may have changed her route due to a fallen tree, or that she may have had an accident while cycling and was waiting for help. However, neither she nor her bike was found, as if they had disappeared completely. The police concluded that Annick was likely the victim of a crime, possibly a kidnapping, but no ransom demand was made, which was concerning. Despite this, people still hoped to find her alive, and the investigation remained active. The search was one of the largest in the country's history. In addition to the police, hundreds of volunteers were involved, including mounted officers, dogs, and helicopters. Police interviewed all local residents near the club and the area where Annick went missing, but no one had seen her. All efforts seemed to be in vain. Her parents distributed flyers with their daughter's photo and put up posters of Annick everywhere. They spoke to the media, begging for their daughter to come home and for any witnesses to come forward. The lack of leads made Annick's disappearance even more puzzling. Police found no signs of a struggle, no belongings belonging to Annick, and no other clues. They tried to track her missing cell phone, discovering that it had been turned on and off several times that night and the next morning, connecting to cell towers. Police and search teams scoured the areas where Annick's phone signal was detected but found nothing. On the evening of May 3, 2007, a passerby walking along the canal saw a large package floating in the water. Concerned, he called the police. At the time, the whole country was on high alert for Annick's disappearance, and the man feared that the package might contain her body. When divers arrived, they struggled to retrieve the package because it was unusually heavy. Upon examination, they discovered human remains inside, carefully packed with 2 bricks to weigh it down and prevent it from floating. The killer may have underestimated the strong currents of the canal and the effects of decomposition. Identifying the victim proved difficult due to the state of decomposition and water damage. A forensic expert was only able to confirm that the remains belonged to a girl. Police suspected that it could be Anik, who had recently gone missing, and her dental records eventually confirmed this. An autopsy revealed that Anik had died from blunt force trauma to the head, with a fractured skull and signs of assault. The news devastated Anik's family, who had hoped for her safe return. The brutal nature of the murder raised concerns in the community, highlighting that the perpetrator was dangerous and posed a threat to society. The investigation faced significant challenges. Although the area where the body was discovered was thoroughly searched, no evidence was found that could help solve the case. The only potential clue was Anik's missing bicycle, which may have had the attacker's fingerprints on it. More than a year later, on August 26, 2008, Anik's bicycle was found 50 kilometers away in Leuven. It was discovered in a suspicious location, suggesting that the perpetrator had deliberately hidden it. Additionally, the bicycle had been repainted. Unfortunately, the perpetrator had been very careful to remove any traces, and no fingerprints or other evidence were recovered from the bicycle. On January 3, 2010, almost 3 years after Anik's disappearance, emergency services responded to a report of a fire. Firefighters discovered an Opel Corsa burning on the road. When they arrived, they found 2 bodies inside the car. The car belonged to Kevin Paulus. Dental records identified the deceased as Shauna Appletans, 18, and Kevin Paulus, 22, the car's owners. However, autopsy results showed that their deaths were not caused by fire. Both had been shot before the car caught fire. Authorities believe the couple was murdered, and that the car was deliberately set on fire to destroy vital evidence. The shocking murder in this quiet community has had a profound effect on both locals and the police. Fear has spread throughout the area, with many people reluctant to leave their homes and their teenage children being prevented from going out. The public is calling on the police to quickly identify the perpetrator and restore safety to the community. When the police investigated Kevin's background, they discovered that he had a history of violence. Kevin was Shauna's boyfriend, and it is believed that he even knew Anik. The police found Anik's bicycle in Leuven, where Shauna lived. This suggested a potential connection between the 2 murders. As the investigation progressed, Kevin was named as a possible suspect. Police believe he may have killed Anik first, then his girlfriend Shauna, before setting fire to her bike to destroy the evidence and taking his own life. However, this theory requires further investigation to be proven. The police are focused on gathering evidence of his guilt, but their efforts are hampered by a lack of witnesses and direct evidence linking Kevin to the crimes. Soon after, a new suspect emerged: Ronald Jansen, Shauna and Kevin's strange neighbor, identified by other residents. People around said that Ronald often argued with Shauna and even fought with her. Kevin stood up for her. It seems that there was considerable tension between the neighbors, raising the question of whether this conflict could escalate into murder. Ronald is a teacher known to be responsible and serious, a model teacher respected by both his colleagues and students. At first glance, he seems unlikely to be involved in any criminal activity. However, he has been summoned for questioning in connection with the cases of Anik, Shauna, and Kevin. Ronald maintained his innocence, claiming that he had spent the day at home watching TV and had not gone out. Since he lived alone, no one could verify his alibi. Ronald stated that the conflicts between him and the young couple, Kevin and Shauna, were due to their constant insults and rude behavior, which led to arguments. He denied ever fighting with them, describing himself as a polite person. However, The police found his statements concerning because they were not convincing. They obtained a search warrant for his home, and during the search, they discovered a gun hidden in a bag of cat food. Ronald could not explain why he had the gun and quickly became agitated. Eventually, Ronald admitted to killing Shauna and Kevin. He explained that on the evening of January 2, he could not sleep and went outside. While he was out, his noisy neighbors, Shauna and Kevin, arrived and immediately began taunting and insulting him, as they often did. In a fit of rage, he lost control and ran home to get a gun and 3 gas cans. Upon returning outside, he found that Shauna and Kevin had already left. He knocked on their door, and when Shauna answered, he threatened her with the weapon. He forced them both into his car and drove away from the city. Kevin was driving. Ronald was in the front passenger seat, holding a weapon and pointing it at Kevin, while Shauna was in the back seat, unable to escape. She cried and begged Ronald to let them go. They drove for about 30 minutes until Ronald found a suitable deserted area. He ordered them to stop and shot Kevin twice in the temple, killing him instantly. Frightened, Shauna began to cry even louder and begged for her life. Ronald demanded that she be intimate with him, promising to release her afterward. Reluctantly, she agreed. However, after they were intimate, he realized that he could not spare her life because she might call the police. Coldly, he killed her as well. Ronald then moved Kevin's body into the trunk of his car, drove to a location closer to his home, and burned the car to destroy all evidence. He walked home through the fields and arrived at 4 a.m. Once home, he showered, burned his clothes, and threw the murder weapon into a ditch. Despite a thorough search, the weapon was never found. Ronald knew how to evade justice, so he carefully washed the blood and gunpowder residue off his hands. Eventually, Ronald Jansen was arrested, and the police began collecting evidence to prosecute him. Ronald was born on February 6, 1971, in Borsum, Limburg Province, Belgium. He was the third of 4 children in his family. His father worked as a miner, and his mother was a cleaner. Despite being a diligent student, Ronald faced bullying from his classmates due to his speech difficulties. Frustrated, he attacked his bullies with a baseball bat, which resulted in his suspension. After this incident, his mother enrolled him in another school, but the challenges continued. At home, Ronald suffered physical and mental abuse from his father. The fear of returning home and the constant violence caused him to have trouble sleeping. At one point, Ronald considered taking his own life or harming his father. Ultimately, he chose the latter. Ronald's father was diabetic and required insulin injections. Ronald switched the insulin with a dangerous substance, which his father accidentally injected. Although his father survived, he realized what Ronald had done. Instead of reporting Ronald to the police, he chose to abuse him even more. As a result, Ronald ran away from home and moved to a distant place. Using his skills, he enrolled in a university and eventually moved to Leuven. To support himself during his studies, Ronald worked part-time. Although he earned little money, he managed to save. In 1993, he graduated and began his career as a teacher. During his final year of study, Ronald met a girl named Natalie. She was from the Netherlands, 3 years older than him, and both attractive and kind. The young couple developed a strong relationship and began dating. After 2 years, they got married. For a while, they moved frequently because of Natalie's job. However, Ronald easily found teaching positions and quickly became a respected educator at every institution he joined. Eventually, they settled in Loxbergen, where Ronald began teaching not only computer science, but also mathematics and economics at the university. Intelligent, well-educated, and approachable, Ronald became popular among his colleagues and students. He enjoyed hiking outdoors, which helped him manage his insomnia. Ronald and Natalie dreamed of having a large family. Their first daughter was born in 1998, followed by their second daughter 3 years later. Unfortunately, Having children began to put a strain on their marriage. Misunderstandings and conflicts arose between them. Ronald, who had long struggled with sleep problems, found it even harder to rest due to the constant crying of his newborn. His persistent insomnia made him irritable and aggressive, which frightened Natalie. Natalie went to the police and accused Ronald of abuse. She claimed that Ronald had given her sleeping pills and abused her while she was unconscious. Ronald denied the accusations, stating that he had given her the pills to calm her down and that everything between them had been consensual. The police doubted Natalie's testimony, and the case was eventually closed. Following this, Natalie filed for divorce, took the children, and left Ronald, who stayed behind and lived alone. He did not make an effort to maintain contact with his children. Neighbors often saw him wandering around at night, seemingly due to insomnia. Although they found his behavior strange, they were not particularly concerned. Had the police taken Natalie's accusations seriously, some of the subsequent tragedies might have been prevented. From the information available to them, it was evident that Ronald was a cunning man. His intelligence allowed him to destroy evidence and evade responsibility. Criminals like Ronald are among the most difficult to catch, and holding them accountable for their actions is an extremely challenging task. Surprisingly, Ronald admitted to killing Anik in 2007 and confessed to 3 other instances of abuse committed in a dormitory in Leuven during his university years. He claimed that he did not know the victims' names, could not remember the dates of the attacks, and could not describe the victims because it was too dark to see their faces. Ronald insisted that Anik's murder was accidental. According to Ronald, he could not sleep, so he drove to another city, where he encountered Anik cycling through the neighborhood. He blocked her path with his car, frightening her. Anik abandoned her bike and tried to run away, but Ronald caught her, tied her hands, and forced her into his car. He brought her to his home. Ronald claimed he had no intention of abusing or killing her, stating that he only wanted her to sleep in bed with him overnight and planned to release her the next morning. However, the next morning, Ronald got into an argument with his neighbors, Shauna and Kevin, who insulted him. Fearing that Anik might remember his identity and report him to the police, Ronald decided to kill her. At the same time, he also decided to abuse her. Ronald hit Anik in the head with a hammer in the bathroom and wiped the area with cleaning products to eliminate evidence. However, the police did not believe his explanation. They suspected the murder had a much deeper motive, and it appeared that Ronald had planned to kill her. The public was shocked when the truth was revealed. No one could believe that Ronald, a seemingly respectable man, could have committed such horrific crimes. Ronald's attorney sought to highlight his mental abnormalities and requested a psychiatric evaluation. Experts concluded that, although Ronald displayed certain psychological deviations, he was competent to stand trial. Psychiatrists described him as a latent psychopath and a serial killer who acted with intelligence and precision. His crimes followed a calculated pattern, beginning with abuse, breaking into dormitories to attack girls, and culminating in murder. Ronald has shown no remorse for his crimes. His humble and unassuming appearance helped him avoid suspicion. Ronald Jansen's trial began in late September 2011. The jury convicted Ronald Jansen of murder and abuse. Given his high risk of reoffending, the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In Belgium, a life sentence does not necessarily mean that the convicted individual will spend the remainder of their life in prison. Typically, those serving such sentences are imprisoned for between 15 and 23 years. After serving 15 years, Ronald will be eligible to apply for parole, which could potentially allow him to be released early. The families of the victims and others were outraged by the lenient sentence given to Ronald, who was responsible for taking at least 3 lives and abusing several young girls. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ted Shaughnessy. Ted Shaughnessy, born on February 7, 1963, is the youngest of three children. His family lived near Phoenix, Arizona. From a young age, all the siblings in the family developed a love for fast cars. Ted dreamed of owning sports cars and was passionate about everything related to them. Relatives and friends described Ted as a kind and fun-loving person. In the early 1980s, he met a woman named Corey at a hair salon in Phoenix. They began dating, and in the late 1980s they got married. The couple later moved to Austin, Texas, where they started a jewelry business together. Corey had a deep passion for gems and fine arts, and worked as an appraiser in their family business. In contrast, Ted was friendly and approachable, easily building relationships with customers and partners, which helped secure profitable deals while keeping everyone happy. Their family business continued to grow, and they bought a new house near their store. By 2000, the couple still had no children. In the spring of 2000, they traveled to Ukraine and adopted a 1.5-year-old boy, whom they named Nick. This moment marked the long-awaited beginning of parenthood for the family. Over the years, Nick grew up and developed a love for fast cars, just like his father. To share these experiences, Nick and Ted often went go-karting together, and Ted also took his son for rides in a sports car. Over time, Nick began to show an aptitude for business. He started selling chocolate bars from his school locker and always had pocket money. While in high school, he developed a hobby of disassembling cars. In 2015, he met a girl named Jackie Edison, who had recently moved to Texas from New York. The two were immediately attracted to each other, but Nick's parents, Ted and Corey, disapproved of Jackie, feeling that she was not the right person for him. However, they chose not to interfere in the relationship in order to maintain a good relationship with Nick. After high school, the couple moved into a house near a university. Jackie planned to study engineering, while Nick pursued a business degree. During this time, Nick also became interested in trading. Despite living far from home, he still made the 2-hour trip to Austin every weekend to visit his parents. Life seemed to be on track, and there was no sign of trouble ahead. Early in the morning of March 2, 2018, at 4:30 a.m., Ted and Corey were awakened by the sound of their dog barking. This was not unusual, as dogs often react to possums or other small animals that sometimes wander onto the family property. Corey believed there was no reason to worry. Ted decided to go check out the disturbance. Since the couple lived in Texas, he brought his .45 caliber pistol for protection. According to Corey, she quickly fell asleep after Ted left to investigate. However, just a few minutes later, she was awakened by a loud bang coming from the kitchen, followed by several more. Panicking, Corey grabbed the gun she had left by the bed and ran to help her husband. As she stepped out of the bedroom, she noticed their dog. Suddenly, she was shot while standing in the doorway, and a dark figure appeared, looking menacing. In a panic, Corey fired all 6 bullets from her pistol toward the door, unsure of who or what was there. After firing, she ran into the closet to hide, fearing for her life and expecting the intruder to find her and shoot her. While in the closet, she grabbed her phone and called 911. She reported that someone had broken into the house and that she had shot one of the attackers. During the call, Corey heard faint moaning coming from somewhere in the house. She couldn't identify who was making the sound. Worried that her husband might have been injured in the gunfight, she felt an overwhelming urge to go help him. However, the police insisted that she stay in the closet, warning her that it might be too dangerous to leave. 15 minutes later, Corey was notified that the police had arrived at her house. By then, the moaning had stopped, and an eerie silence had fallen over the house. Cautiously, Corey walked out of the closet and toward the front door. As she passed through the kitchen, she saw her husband, Ted, lying motionless on the floor, surrounded by bullet casings. Overwhelmed with shock, Corey tried to open the front door, but found no one there. It turned out that the police had gone to the wrong house. At the time, they were at a neighbor's house, trying to determine where the gunshots had come from. They eventually realized their mistake and rushed to Corey's house, where they found her trembling on the doorstep. The officers quickly got back into their car and drove to Corey's home, arriving around 8 a.m. There, they met Corey, who was deeply distressed and struggling to process the events that had unfolded. Although still in shock and uncertain about the details, she knew her husband had died. Over the next 3 months, Corey's son Nick and his girlfriend Jackie moved in with her to provide support. Friends and acquaintances of the family were horrified by the tragedy. Ted was described as a kind and hard-working man who had built his life with integrity and deserved to spend his later years in peace. No one believed he had any enemies capable of such a violent act. Speculation soon arose that the motive for the attack might have been linked to the family's wealth, as their home contained many valuable items. Police examined the crime scene and found 2 different types of ammunition, suggesting there were 2 attackers, each using a different handgun. There were no signs of forced entry, but police discovered an open window in a distant bedroom, where a surveillance camera had been removed. It appeared the attackers had entered the house through this window. A forensic scientist discovered fingerprints at the scene, which were immediately sent to a lab for analysis. In the room where Nick had been staying, police found a chest of drawers that had previously held a .40 caliber handgun. However, the gun was missing and turned out to be the only item stolen from the house. Since the caliber matched one of the guns used in the shooting, police suspected it was the murder weapon. After interviewing the Corey family and their neighbors, police learned that the family owned a high-value jewelry store, which was well known in the area. Corey, her son Nick, and Jackie surrendered their cell phones to assist in the investigation. Nick, who had an alibi because he was 2 hours away from his parents' home at the time of the attack, supported his story with phone records and the security system he had installed at his parents' house. However, the security system had been turned off on the night of the shooting, which immediately raised suspicions. Nick explained that this was not unusual, as his parents sometimes left the system off when they were both at home. Nevertheless, even when the system was in sleep mode, it still recorded some activity. Police discovered that the criminals likely broke into the house at 4:27 a.m., which was the exact time the system was disabled. The next signal from the system was recorded at 4:44 a.m., giving the criminals only about 17 minutes to search the house. Rumor had it that the house contained millions of dollars worth of jewelry, gold, safes, and other valuables. However, nothing appeared to have been stolen, making robbery an unlikely motive. Adding to the mystery was the strange behavior of the family dogs. How could they neither hear nor smell the intruders and fail to alert the family for 17 minutes? Dogs would normally bark even if an unfamiliar car stopped in the driveway. Clearly, something was wrong. The first person the police suspected was Corey. Suspicion fell on her because she was the sole beneficiary of Ted's life insurance policy, which was set to pay her $1 million. Shortly after her husband's death, she contacted the insurance company to file a claim. She argued that, after her husband's death, the company he managed began to face serious challenges. Sales dropped significantly, customers left, and delivery problems arose, creating an urgent need for money. However, the insurance company denied her claim because she was already a suspect in her husband's murder. This was how Corey found out she was under investigation, much to her outrage. Nick and his girlfriend Jackie were also considered suspects. When the police searched Nick and Jackie's home, they discovered a marriage certificate. It turned out that the young couple had secretly married 8 months earlier, without informing their parents. Nick's mother only learned about the marriage through the police, which shocked her. Corey gave Jackie a piece of gold jewelry adorned with diamonds as a wedding gift. Shortly after, Nick and his wife took over the family jewelry store. These changes seemed to help Corey cope with the pain of his loss. Meanwhile, the police received the results of the fingerprint analysis from the window of the Corey family home. The fingerprints were found to belong to the installer who had installed the window years ago and had not returned since. This man lived in Minnesota, not Texas, and had a solid alibi. However, the police could not disregard the window, as it appeared to be the most logical point of entry for the perpetrator. During an interrogation, one of the officers noticed that Nick repeatedly mentioned using the window to enter his house when he came home drunk from a party, or when he did not want to wake his sleeping parents. Interestingly, the police had not told him that this could have been how the intruder entered the house. In another interview, Nick mentioned his best friend, Spencer Patterson. The two had been close for years, and Spencer frequently visited Nick's family home. Spencer, who came from a poor background and disliked his job, may have secretly envied Nick, who was wealthier and more fortunate. Nick had told Spencer that a particular window in the house was often left unlocked, which the police believed could have been the intruder's entry point. Spencer was also familiar with the layout of the house, including the location of the family safe and gun boxes. During one of the interviews, Nick revealed that he had previously given Spencer a .380 caliber pistol. This detail raised suspicion because cartridges of the same caliber were found at the scene of the massacre, linking it to one of the murder weapons. The police decided to question Spencer, who admitted that he was familiar with the window in question and had visited Nick's house several times. Spencer also handed over the .380 caliber pistol that Nick had given him. However, after conducting a ballistics test, it was confirmed that the gun was not used in the murder, proving that Spencer was not involved in the case. Spencer, however, pointed the police toward another, more likely suspect, Nick. The police could not ignore the fact that Nick was eager to propose numerous theories about the case, none of which proved useful. This raised suspicions about whether he was involved in Ted's death. Throughout the investigation, Nick's behavior drew attention. The day after the murder, he independently questioned the neighbors as if he were taking over the investigation. When the police conducted fingerprint and DNA tests on everyone present in the house, Nick's behavior was notably strange. It was discovered that Nick was experiencing significant financial difficulties. His business ventures were unprofitable, and he had spent all the money his parents had given him. Nick's independent projects had stalled, and he showed no intention of finding a job. For a long time, his parents had supported him, covering all his expenses, but they had hoped he would eventually become self-sufficient. Just before the tragedy, Nick's parents had loaned him $30,000 with the intention of funding his future college education. However, instead of pursuing his studies, he spent the money on trading, as he had always done. Disappointed, his parents decided to stop supporting him financially, hoping this would motivate him to take responsibility and start building his own career and life. To reinforce this, they asked Nick and Jackie to live separately. His parents believed that living apart from his girlfriend might encourage him to consider college, much like Jackie. Instead, Nick borrowed another $5,000 from a family friend and continued gambling it all on trading. He ultimately failed and never repaid the loan. Police suspect that these financial troubles may have been the motive for the attack. However, Nick had an alibi. It seemed likely that he did not personally shoot his father, so the police needed to determine who had committed the crime. The police returned to Nick and Jackie's home. This time, they found several bullet boxes, with the brand and caliber of the bullets matching those found at the crime scene. The investigation also uncovered another lie. Nick had previously claimed that he had not visited his parents' home for a long time, but the police discovered that he had been there just a few days before the tragedy. Although Nick denied this, the police obtained irrefutable evidence proving he had lied. Another suspicious detail emerged. 2 days before the attack on Ted, there was an unusual gap in the communication records between Nick and Jackie. The two had been in regular contact via phone and text, but during this particular period, they had stopped communicating entirely. When their cell phones were examined, it became clear that the devices had been deliberately wiped clean shortly before the investigation began. Many messages had been edited or deleted, and the phones had been factory reset. However, they had overlooked the fact that all the data had been backed up on a computer. The reason behind their hasty attempt to clean the phones soon became clear. Turns out the couple was facing much more serious financial troubles than Nick had disclosed to his parents. The police decided to question Spencer again, suspecting that he was withholding information. Spencer eventually confessed that, shortly before Ted was murdered, Nick had approached him with an offer to pay him to carry out a murder. The plan was to kill both of Nick's parents. If the plan succeeded, Nick would inherit about $8 million, including business assets. Spencer revealed that he had been promised a share of the money. However, Spencer refused to commit the crime, prompting Nick to threaten to kill him if he revealed anything about the plan. Corey, shocked and refusing to believe the accusations, hired Austin's best lawyer to defend Nick. She believed that Nick had been victimized by the same arbitrary police actions she had experienced during the initial investigation. On May 29, 2018, Nick and Jackie were arrested for solicitation of murder, a crime punishable by death under state law. 2 months later, Jackie was released on bail. Corey had hoped that Nick would soon be cleared and released, but the situation took a drastic turn when the investigation exposed the real culprits. Police reviewed surveillance footage from the house, dated February 28, which showed 2 unidentified men. One of them was later identified as Cameron Vosmek, an employee of a window company whose fingerprints had been found early in the investigation. Upon contacting the window company, authorities confirmed Cameron's identity. When police visited his home again, Cameron was absent. Instead, they spoke to his wife, who immediately admitted she knew the reason for their visit. She revealed that her husband had denied any involvement in the crime, but implicated his co-worker, 25-year-old Johnny Leon. When police located Johnny, he initially denied any wrongdoing, but eventually confessed. Johnny revealed that Nick had offered him $100,000 to kill someone close to him. Johnny admitted to being an accomplice, overwhelmed with guilt to the point of requesting the death penalty for himself. He confessed to using a .40 caliber gun provided by Nick, a weapon that had previously been reported missing from Ted's home. Police further discovered that Nick had disabled the security system on the property. This revelation horrified Corey, who now faced the devastating reality of her son's true nature. She realized that for 3 months after Ted's death, she had unknowingly lived under the same roof as the person who had plotted to kill her. Nick attempted to justify his actions, claiming that his father had been suffering from chronic depression and that he was merely aiding his father by ending his life. Corey staunchly refuted Nick's claim, asserting that Ted had no history of mental health issues. Meanwhile, Nick's wife, Jackie, denied any involvement in the crime, claiming ignorance of her husband's plans. Jackie initially refused to cooperate with the police and sought to avoid responsibility. However, it later emerged that she had been aware of Nick's intentions. Jackie claimed she had tried to dissuade Nick from proceeding with the crime, but her statement was met with skepticism. Although she could have warned the police, Jackie chose not to. Jackie eventually agreed to cooperate with the investigation, which earned her release on bail. She testified against Nick, resumed her college education, and returned to her daily life. Meanwhile, authorities identified the second accomplice in Ted's murder as Ariane Smith. Despite the severity of their crimes, Nick Shaughnessy, Johnny Leon, and Ariane Smith avoided the death penalty by striking plea deals with the prosecution. In April 2021, they each pleaded guilty to lesser charges and were sentenced to 35 years in prison, with the possibility of parole. As of June 2023, all 3 remain incarcerated. Jackie received a much lighter sentence for her cooperation. She served 4 months in prison and was placed on 10 years of probation. Hello friends, Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Christa Waninger. On May 2, 1963, a tragic event occurred on Via Emilia in Rome when police were called to an apartment building after witnesses reported finding an injured girl. Two police officers arrived at the apartment building and went up to the fourth floor. In the hallway between apartments 14 and 15, they discovered a blonde woman in a blue coat lying unconscious in a large pool of blood, her eyes wide with horror. Several people had gathered around her, including a shocked janitor and a young neighbor who worked at a medical center. The neighbor checked the victim's pulse, performed CPR, and did everything she could to keep the girl alive until an ambulance arrived. One of the neighbors called an ambulance, but by the time it arrived, it was too late. The girl was dead. The victim was identified as Christa Waninger, 23. She had come to Rome in search of success and fame, but tragically, she had been fatally stabbed 7 times. The police immediately began questioning neighbors and witnesses to piece together what had happened. However, no one had witnessed the attack, not even the residents of apartments 14 and 15. The police knocked on the doors of both apartments, and Gerda Hodap came out. When asked by the police about Christa, she stated that they were friends. They had planned to meet, but Christa was attacked and stabbed just steps away from Gerda's apartment. The attack occurred at 2:50 p.m., and Gerda claimed that she had been taking a nap and had not heard anything unusual. While Christa was brutally murdered behind closed doors, it caused quite a commotion on their floor. Her explanation seemed implausible. The doorman informed the police that Christa did not live in the building. They knew each other because the victim frequently visited Gerda's apartment. The murder had occurred nearby. After investigating a few blocks away, the police went to Christa's house, which appeared to be quite empty. Meanwhile, Gerda was taken to the police station for questioning while the authorities carefully examined the crime scene. Under the doorknob of Gerda's apartment, the police discovered a bloody handprint, indicating that Christa had tried to call for help. The building's doorman recalled that when he heard a woman scream, he quickly ran up the stairs. On his way, he encountered a strange man coming down who seemed startled to see him. At first, the doorman did not pay much attention to the strange man. However, he later suspected that there was a connection between this man and the case. When the doorman arrived at the scene, several residents from nearby apartments had gathered. They found Christa lying in a large pool of blood, her breathing irregular and her condition deteriorating. The witnesses were all in a state of panic and did not know how to help. Gerda, who was present at the police station, was willing to share any information she had about her friend Christa. She seemed genuinely concerned about the attack and did not understand why anyone would want to harm Christa. They had been friends for a long time, supporting each other in their modeling and acting careers. Gerda said that Christa was supposed to arrive at around 3 p.m., but she had been feeling unwell that day and had taken sleeping pills, which caused her to miss the attack. Although Gerda spoke about her sleep problems, she could not remember the name of the pills she had taken or explain why she had not canceled her meeting with Christa despite having gone to bed. The police found Gerda's story suspicious. Christa had suffered serious injuries, including 7 stab wounds, 3 of which were in the chest. The attacker had used a large knife to assault Christa, leaving her unable to be saved. In addition, Christa had several defensive wounds on her arms. The forensic expert observed that all of the wounds appeared to have been inflicted from above, indicating that the attacker was tall. In interviews with witnesses, it was confirmed that a man, described as unknown, had fled the scene shortly before the police arrived. Several people, including the concierge, reported seeing a tall man in a blue jacket leaving the building shortly after the attack. Using the descriptions of the witnesses, a composite sketch was created and subsequently published in newspapers and broadcast on television. The police reconstructed the timeline of events, determining that Christa left her apartment at approximately 2 p.m. and planned to return at 5 p.m. Before the appointment, she had visited a friend. About 30 minutes later, she arrived at Gerda's house, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and was attacked on the stairs. It is believed that the attacker knew Krista and was waiting for her. Police initially suspected her friend Gerda because of her strange behavior during the attack. A neighbor reported that she had called Gerda's apartment and heard someone moving around behind the door, but no one answered, perhaps out of fear. The police suspected that Gerda was withholding information. Gerda insisted that no one rang the doorbell until the police arrived and claimed that she had heard nothing until the police knocked. Krista's murder in broad daylight in central Rome caused a media frenzy. The police hoped to gather useful information from the public, but the widespread attention also led to rumors spreading rapidly. The police received dozens of statements, most of which were complex, while others simply restated what was already known. They investigated all known criminals with a history of knife attacks, focusing not only on those who might be hiding in Rome, but also checking neighboring cities, although this effort was fruitless. In the midst of these events, a wave of panic spread throughout the community. People became increasingly afraid to go out, and the police station was flooded with angry calls from locals urging them to arrest the person responsible for Krista's attack. Some callers even made threats to the police, demanding action to ensure the safety of the streets. Meanwhile, Gerda maintained her innocence, calling the police's suspicion of her an insult. The police began to explore other leads, focusing especially on those close to Krista. There were many indications that the perpetrator was connected to Krista, leading the police to believe that the attack may have been motivated by jealousy or personal animosity. Therefore, they looked into the relationships Krista had formed since moving to another country. One notable individual was Krista's boyfriend. He was very jealous and possessive, with evidence suggesting that he had abused Krista on several occasions. Their relationship was tumultuous, often triggered by his unfounded suspicions that Krista was cheating on him with other men. This jealousy may have stemmed from several factors, including Krista's notebook filled with the phone numbers of men in the modeling and acting industries. Her profession required her to socialize and network with many people, and Krista frequently attended social events to promote herself and build valuable relationships, which made her boyfriend feel uncomfortable. He became jealous of every random person she interacted with, and his insecurities led him to become increasingly controlling. Every phone call from a man was viewed as a betrayal, which angered her boyfriend. This pressure caused Krista to decline movie offers and made her financially dependent on him. The police identified two suspects: Krista's boyfriend, who had both a motive and a violent streak, and her friend Gerda Hodap, who was near the scene of the murder but claimed not to have seen or heard anything. It is possible that Gerda had a motive for the murder, perhaps wanting to eliminate an attractive rival. However, there is no evidence to support this theory. Journalists constantly intervened, probing for information and asking difficult questions. The police were puzzled by the presence of a strange man in a blue jacket. Although this man appeared at the crime scene and quickly left, he coldly mentioned that there was a woman screaming on the 4th floor, without offering any help. Other witnesses grew suspicious and tried to explain the presence of this stranger. The police concluded that the case might have been carefully planned, with the man in the blue jacket acting as a distraction. However, if that were the case, the criminal would have likely stayed at the crime scene, which raised suspicions about Gerda. Meanwhile, Gerda faced constant interrogations and became a media phenomenon. Journalists pursued her, spreading rumors and portraying her as a monster. The police believed that if Gerda was not involved in the murder, she may have acted as an informant or concealed information. However, to date, there has been no concrete evidence linking her to the case. The police continue to investigate the possibility of a random attack. However, they face a shortage of resources. A search of Krista's inner circle yielded no leads. Her address book contained many phone numbers related to men and various clubs in Rome, as well as organizations connected to modeling and acting. Hundreds of contacts had accumulated over the years. Despite a thorough police investigation, each contact led to a dead end. Gerda remained under close police surveillance. They even took her to the morgue to view Krista's body and observe her reaction. The police noted her emotionless response to their questions. The interrogations were repeated several times. Gerda changed her story, claiming that the doorbell rang when Krista visited. However, the screams that followed frightened her, so she did not open the door. Gerda explained her dishonesty by saying that she felt ashamed for not helping her friend. The police believed that she was a potential accomplice to the crime, suggesting that Krista had been lured there so that her attacker could kill her. Ultimately, the police were unable to obtain a confession that would identify Gerda as the killer, and at most, she could be considered an accomplice. By reconstructing the timeline of events, the police discovered why the janitor had not noticed a strange man entering the building. He had visited the utility room several times during the day. It was a complete coincidence that he had entered just before Krista arrived at the apartment complex. This raised suspicions that the attacker knew exactly when and where Krista would arrive. Several witnesses reported seeing Krista enter the apartment complex alone, unescorted, and without anyone else accompanying her. This led the police to believe that the perpetrator had entered the apartment complex before Krista, just before she arrived. It was suspected that the perpetrator knew which floor she would go to and where to wait for her. After a while, the Krista Waninger murder case yielded no more clues. Public interest in the case also waned, as no similar attacks occurred afterward. People began to calm down, and Krista's case gradually faded into oblivion, largely because her family lived far away in another country. Despite efforts to understand the situation, it was difficult to generate significant interest in the case. Krista's mother and sister actively distributed flyers with her picture in the hope of attracting potential witnesses, but their efforts did not advance the investigation. The investigation into Krista's murder had stalled for 10 months until an anonymous witness contacted a local newspaper. Using a false name, he asked to speak to the editor. The man claimed to be the brother of Krista's killer and offered to sell information to the newspaper for a large sum of money. The journalist who took the call felt that the man's story was more than just a scam to capitalize on the tragedy. Believing that the witness might have accurate information, he decided to contact the police. The journalist carefully communicated with the man, promising to collect the necessary funds to pay him in advance by the evening. They agreed to contact him later to discuss the details. After the call, the journalist went to the police station to report the unusual conversation. The police showed interest in the case, and the journalist agreed to work with them, using special equipment to monitor the incoming call. The anonymous caller contacted the journalist at 19:05. During this call, 2 police officers listened in and recorded the conversation. They were able to locate the source of the call. Several police officers then went to the address provided, where they found a 32-year-old man using the phone booth. His name was Guido Pieri. When they saw him, the police immediately recognized that he matched the police sketch of the suspect. He was arrested and searched, and their suspicions were confirmed when they found a 30-centimeter long knife in his jacket pocket, similar to the weapon used in the attack on Krista. The police believed they had the right suspect. Unfortunately, further examination revealed that Krista was not killed with this knife. Guido Pieri insisted from the beginning that he was only trying to profit from the story, but he was unable to provide any clear information. When the police searched his home, they found another knife, but no blood, and it could not be linked to Krista's wounds. Disturbing notes were found in Guido's home, including 5 notebooks detailing gruesome murders of women. The most alarming was the final story, which was very similar to the case of Krista Waninger. The story included specific details that had not been made public and were known only to the perpetrator, raising suspicions against Guido. Guido Pieri grew up in a family with 4 brothers and 3 sisters. From an early age, he had a strong passion for adventure painting. However, while in vocational school, he decided to drop out and start working. especially after struggling to finish 8th grade 3 times. Although he was not unintelligent, he had obvious problems with self-control. By the age of 18, he was employed as a mechanic in a construction company, maintaining a fleet of equipment. After 10 years, Guido married a much older woman. During this time, he pursued his passion for painting, dreaming of becoming an artist. In February, Guido moved to Paris to pursue this dream, but unfortunately, his efforts ended in disappointment. In his diary, he explained his feelings in detail. It was clear that Guido was a deeply creative individual with a unique perspective on life, but he struggled to manage the challenges he faced and find his own path. He lacked the courage and motivation needed to overcome these obstacles. As a result, Guido moved back to Rome, ended his marriage, and took a job as a secretary at the Institute, where he worked until he was 63. His diaries reveal a disillusioned man full of ambitions and ideas that he was unable to turn into reality. When the police questioned him about the notes they discovered during the search, Guido explained that they were ideas for a future novel, as he longed to write a book. When reviewing the notes, the police noticed many similarities to the real-life case of Christa Waninger. Details of the crime scene and descriptions of the people involved closely resembled the apartment building and surrounding area where Christa was murdered. This raised questions about whether these accounts referred to her murder, which aroused suspicions among the police. Guido led a seemingly normal life, frequenting upscale restaurants and bars. However, he remained on the police radar, having been spotted at several other violent crime scenes unrelated to Christa. Unfortunately, he did not confess or provide any evidence of his innocence. At that time, witnesses who had seen a suspicious man in a blue jacket leaving the apartment building after hearing Christa scream had not yet testified. 3 of the 4 witnesses identified him as Guido. Despite ongoing questioning and suspicion, no physical evidence was found linking him to the crime. The police decided to return all the confiscated diaries belonging to Guido, and he was released. During this time, Christa's sister pushed for the investigation to be reopened. The police reviewed all relevant information, but this lead did not yield any results. Guido remained the prime suspect, but he did not confess. Despite having no evidence to present, the police continued to investigate and put pressure on him. Surprisingly, Guido Pieri went to the police station and confessed to killing Christa Waninger. He was arrested, and it took a year before the trial began. Despite his confession, he was acquitted due to a lack of sufficient evidence. His lawyer argued that Guido had mental health problems and pointed out that he refused to confess again. By this time, he had been officially diagnosed with schizophrenia, which led the police to consider his confession unreliable. There were 2 more hearings. In both trials, Guido Pieri was found guilty, but he was released on bail due to his mental condition. Guido later changed his story, claiming that he had been at the scene of the murder by accident and denied any guilt. In addition, Guido destroyed his own notebooks, containing disturbing notes that could have been used against him. During the psychiatric evaluation, he was found to be insane. Therefore, the court could only order Guido to undergo treatment for schizophrenia. Despite his crime, he was allowed to go free without any apparent motive. For a long time, he was considered a threat to society, but there was not enough evidence to prove it. He was eventually released and deemed harmless, much to the shock of Christa's family. Sadly, Christa's relatives were never able to obtain justice or see Guido incarcerated. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Amy Mullis. Love triangles are among the most common causes of domestic crimes. This is a story about the Mullis family's farm in Ulville, Iowa, USA, a quiet and peaceful place with a close-knit community. On November 10, 2018, the younger Mollis children stayed home while their parents worked with their oldest son, Tristan, in one of the farm's pig barns. The family divided responsibilities among themselves to ensure everyone handled tasks they were best suited for. On that day, Tristan was cleaning the barn while his father, Todd Mollis, checked the electrical equipment. Tristan's mother, Amy, joined them a little later. When she entered the barn, she tripped over a bucket and nearly fell. Just a day before this incident, Amy had been experiencing health issues, including dizziness and pain. She had visited the doctor multiple times for similar problems. It seemed she hadn't fully recovered, yet she still decided to work. Noticing his wife's exhaustion, her husband suggested that she go home and rest. Todd mentioned that she could assist him later once he finished the main tasks with Tristan. Amy agreed but wanted to complete a small chore first. She intended to visit the nearby shed to retrieve a carrier for their animals, as they needed to take their cat to the veterinary clinic the following day. After Amy left, the father and son continued their work together. Eventually, Todd glanced out the window and noticed that the door of the distant shed was still open, even though Amy had been gone for quite some time. She should have returned by now with the carrier and closed the barn. Growing concerned that something might have happened, he worried that his wife might have fallen again due to her dizziness. He then asked Tristan to go outside and check what was happening. Perhaps his mother needed help. When Tristan arrived at the shed, he was shocked to see his mother with the tines of a corn rake protruding from her body. He rushed inside and realized it was critical. He immediately called for his father. Todd quickly ran to the source of the scream and recognized that he needed to act fast. He instructed his son to fetch the family pickup truck. Tristan was already skilled at driving and could navigate the property swiftly. While Tristan went for the truck, Todd attempted to help Amy and carry her out of the shed. The rake made it difficult for him to maneuver through the narrow space, forcing him to pull it out of her body. By the time Tristan arrived with the pickup truck, Todd had loaded Amy into the vehicle and quickly took the driver's seat. Tristan held his dying mother in his arms as his father called 911. The dispatcher received a call from a very agitated man who was shouting for help. Todd reported that an accident had occurred on the farm and that his wife was seriously injured. He explained to the operator that they had found her lying face down in the shed with a corn rake sticking out of her back. The corn rake had 4 straight, sharp tines designed to easily penetrate hay or piles of leaves, and unfortunately, they had pierced her flesh. While he was on the phone with the operator, Amy stopped breathing. The dispatcher instructed him to pull over and provide first aid. Following the operator's guidance, the father and son stopped their vehicle, laid Amy on the ground, alternated performing artificial respiration and chest compressions. Unfortunately, the resuscitation efforts did not have the desired effect. Todd took Amy to the emergency department, but there the doctors could only confirm the death of her. The police then called the father and son to the station to take their statements while forensic experts examined the scene. Tristan supported his father's account, which helped establish a solid alibi for Todd. Tristan firmly asserted that he had not taken his eyes off his father until he saw the rake protruding from his mother's back. He believes that a tragic accident has occurred. During the initial investigation, most of Tristan's account was corroborated. When Tristan and his father discovered Amy, she was still alive but unconscious. The police also interviewed Todd, who stated that he did not know how his wife was injured, as he was not present when it occurred. Todd speculated that she might have fallen onto a corn rake, possibly due to feeling dizzy. Although this explanation seems somewhat far-fetched, law enforcement chose to wait for the medical examiner's findings before drawing conclusions. The report arrived quickly, raising further questions. Notably, there were 6 puncture wounds from the corn rake, which was puzzling since the tool only had 4 prongs, meaning it should have left only 4 marks. The medical examiner noted that Amy had other injuries, including a bruise on her upper lip and several fresh bruises on her face. There were also similar bruises on her arms and legs, some of which appeared to be defensive wounds, suggesting that she had been in a struggle with at least one other person. There was no doubt that it was not an accident. It was clear that Amy had been attacked. Detectives began investigating the murder, and after new developments emerged, forensic experts returned to the barn to closely examine the scene and validate the coroner's suspicions. During the initial examination right after the incident, it was already dark, so the detectives needed to conduct a thorough inspection this time. Forensic scientists found several bloodstains in the shed, where Tristan had discovered his injured mother. There were small splatters on the chemical bags along the walls, on the floor, and on all nearby surfaces. The scene indicated a violent attack, as the blood had spread widely. This suggested that Amy could not have fallen onto the acorn rake by herself, as her husband had claimed. She had been beaten with a farming tool, receiving 2 or 3 blows. The area where the crime occurred had been overall very peaceful. In the last 10 years, this was only the 4th murder. For this reason, law enforcement officials decided to seek assistance from state authorities, who had much more experience in solving such cases. Investigators spoke with the neighbors of the Mallas family, who revealed that their marriage had long been troubled. Their spouses were experiencing difficulties, frequently argued, even though the husband was known to be calm and non-confrontational. This raised suspicions among the police, leading them to believe that Todd not be telling the truth. He had a motive, making him the primary suspect in the case. Consequently, the police began to examine him more closely. The tragic loss of Amy, a kind and vibrant person, shocked the local community. Many were surprised that a mother of 3 could find herself in such a deadly situation. Detectives began investigating the couple's personal life to find a possible motive for the murder. 5 years earlier, Amy had cheated on Todd, which shattered his trust in her. This betrayal led to a decline in their once ideal relationship. However, they worked through their issues, decided to try to save their marriage for the sake of their children. They attended counseling with a family psychologist. Amy left her nursing job at the hospital to spend more time with her family, help on the farm, where she took care of the plants and animals and managed the family's finances. She told her friends that she quit her job at Todd's urging to avoid new temptations. Meanwhile, Todd also made an effort to spend more time with Amy and their children. Despite these efforts, the psychologist observed that Todd could never fully regain his trust in Amy. Amy spent all her time on the farm, where Todd was usually present both day and night. As a result, Todd's behavior became much more controlling than it had been before. Later, Amy expressed her frustration, saying that her husband was practically monitoring her. They seemed to have reached an agreement about how they spent their time together, which Todd believed was a way to rebuild trust in their relationship. However, this situation became a major issue for Amy. She jokingly referred to herself as her husband's prisoner, she shared with her close friends. Todd even restricted Amy's friendships, deciding who she could communicate with and what interests she could pursue. One of the friends he allowed, Patricia Christofferson, noted that since 2018, Amy had stopped feeling joy in her marriage. Patricia claimed that even a year earlier, Amy had been unhappy, and her affair was a way to escape Todd's excessive control. Others in their circle suspected that Todd was involved in the murder. Several witnesses supported claims that Todd had total control over his wife and exhibited suspicious behavior. However, Todd presented a different narrative. He claimed that he spent nearly all his time with his wife and was very happy, asserting that there were no issues in their relationship. He stated that they had fully restored their previous harmonious and communication that they once had. However, during the investigation, it became clear that this was not entirely accurate. In July 2018, just a few months before the tragedy, Todd noticed changes in Amy's behavior, which led him to question her fidelity. He reviewed phone records and found that Amy had been communicating with another man, Jerry Frasher. Todd discovered around 120 messages exchanged between them and confronted Jerry directly. Jerry, who worked as an assistant on their farm and handled administrative tasks, denied having an affair, insisting that their correspondence was purely work-related. Todd was unable to access their message exchanges, which made him skeptical of Jerry's claims. He even contacted Jerry's wife, who reassured him that she trusted her husband completely and had no concerns about infidelity. This conversation seemed to ease Todd's worries, and he stopped suspecting his wife of any new infidelities. However, investigations later revealed that Amy and Jerry were romantically involved. Amy was having an affair again, which investigators believed could be a motive for murder. The police theorized that Todd discovered the affair, overwhelmed by shock, killed his wife. However, this theory was complicated by Todd's alibi. He had been with Tristan until Tristan went to check on his mother. Tristan claimed there were no arguments between his parents that day, and he had kept an eye on his father. Despite this, the police wanted to explore another possibility. Jerry Frasher might also have had a motive for murder. Jerry did not want to leave his family. Could he have killed Amy to keep his family intact? The detectives needed to investigate this angle as well. Amy often expressed frustration about Todd working too much, leaving her to handle various farm tasks that she disliked. She wanted to go out and enjoy life, spending more time in town. After trying to salvage her relationship, it became clear to her that she and Todd had significant differences. Jerry often visited the farm for work, where he interacted with Todd and Amy. Occasionally, he spoke with Amy privately, and their conversations gradually turned into flirting, then an intimate affair. This relationship began in late May 2018. The couple met about once a week for intimate, typically in cars on the farm's dirt roads or during brief stays in motel rooms. For Amy, it became a source of inspiration, leading her to express a desire to leave her husband and marry Jerry. This would require Jerry to get a divorce, but his wife was unaware of the affair. Jerry was content in his marriage and had no intention of divorcing. He did not take his relationship with Amy seriously and even wanted to end it, as he felt it had gone too far. Law enforcement officials recovered most of the letters exchanged between Jerry and Amy, revealing that their relationship lasted until the summer of 2018. At that point, Jerry suggested they slow things down because he was uncertain about their future together. Meanwhile, there were indications that Amy was determined to confess her feelings. This created a sense of threat for Jerry, providing him with a strong motive for murder. Jerry spent about an hour and a half confessing to the affair but maintained that he could not have killed Amy. He stated that at the time of the attack, he was at his home in Anamosa, which is a 45-minute drive from the crime scene. Investigators checked the mobile phone data of Jerry, which showed activity at the same times every hour. Jerry's cell phone active at around 10:45, 11:45, 12:45, all in Anamosa. However, this did not definitively confirm his alibi, as a calculated murderer would likely avoid taking their phone to the crime scene. The hourly activity raised suspicions, leaving him not entirely free from scrutiny. Investigators were still focused on the widower, Todd. He had a significant financial motive as well. If a divorce occurred, he would have to pay more than half of his income to support their 3 children. Friends mentioned that Amy, despite wanting a divorce, was afraid to leave Todd because she feared his reaction. Some described him as rude and aggressive, suggesting he could be capable of murder, although he had never been seen treating his wife poorly. The investigators then turned their attention to Todd's behavior on the day of Amy's death. During questioning, his reactions raised suspicions. Typically, innocent people defend themselves aggressively, but Todd remained calm when asked about the murder allegations. This calmness could indicate subconscious guilt. Overall, he was known to be a calm person with a quiet temperament. The farm had several cameras, one of which had a view of almost the entire area around the barn, where the murder occurred. Unfortunately, no recordings from that day were saved. It appears someone deleted them to hide their involvement. Given the circumstances, the prime suspect was the victim's husband. In February 2019, Todd Mollis was arrested and charged with murdering his wife. Nearly a year after Amy's death, both her family and the relatives of Todd gathered at the courthouse. Todd, a hard-working farmer known for being a devoted father, now faced charges for the brutal murder of his wife. The defense attorney agreed with the prosecution that the crime was premeditated but argued that Todd could not have attacked his wife with the corn rake, as Tristan had been in sight of him the whole time. They claimed there was no physical evidence linking Todd to the crime, no fingerprints, no DNA on the corn rake, and no traces of the attacker were found. The prosecution countered that the murder was driven by a personal motive, emphasizing that it wasn't a distant shooting but rather a close-range attack using an unusual weapon from the farm's tools. If a stranger had committed the crime, they likely wouldn't have used a tool found on the farm. Todd was familiar with that corn rake, skilled in its use, and knew exactly where it was kept. He acted decisively, leaving Amy no chance to escape. He attacked her multiple times. During the trial, many witnesses who knew both Amy and Todd testified. One of them was a doctor from the emergency room where the victim had worked as a nurse for many years. Amy was brought to the same hospital where she had previously saved lives. Unfortunately, shortly after her arrival, she was declared dead by the medical examiner and law enforcement. The doctors were puzzled by how a single blow from a four-pronged corn rake could cause 6 deep wounds on Amy's body. The eldest son, Tristan, served as the main witness for the defense. Both sides carefully examined his statements during the hearings. The prosecution faced a challenge with the alibi that Tristan maintained. However, just days before the trial began, law enforcement re-interviewed Tristan. He admitted that he had lost sight of his father several times while fetching water for the shed, but insisted that his father was only gone for a few minutes each time. The defendant's lawyer argued that this brief absence was not enough time to commit the crime and hide the evidence. Yet, during the trial, Tristan changed his testimony again, stating that he could not accurately determine how long his father had been missing. This gave the prosecution a chance to highlight Todd's lack of an alibi. However, Tristan insisted that his father could not have killed his mother and claimed he did not see any blood on him, which allowed the defense attorney to build their argument. The defense maintained that Todd did not have enough time to get water, go to the shed, deal with his wife, and return. Furthermore, the blood spatter in the room where the attack took place was too extensive for the attacker to avoid getting covered in blood. The lawyer argued that the prosecution had no direct evidence against Todd, which was true. The case also leaned on the search histories of both the victim and the accused. Amy had searched online about how infidelity could affect property division in a divorce, while Todd's phone had concerning searches related to the consequences of murder. During the trial, Todd spent 3 hours answering the prosecutor's questions, maintaining his innocence and claiming he was unaware of Amy's new relationship. He explained to the jury that the security cameras were not functioning during the attack because, in his view, the cats had accidentally disconnected the wires while looking for a warm spot. Investigators was revealed that the cameras had been out of order for 2 weeks before Amy's death, and Todd only repaired the system after the police discovered the disconnected wires. By the end of the interrogations, the jury began deliberating the verdict. Because there was no direct evidence and many disagreements about the case, the jurors split into 2 groups with opposing opinions. After about 7 hours of discussion, Todd Mollis was found guilty of first-degree murder. The court sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Disappointed, Todd shook his head as he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He immediately disagreed with the verdict once it was announced. He hired a new legal team and filed a motion for a retrial. Todd argued that no one was in the shed when his wife accidentally fell on a corn rake after losing consciousness. She had been feeling dizzy and even visited the hospital the day before her death. There was no substantial evidence against Todd, just speculation and rumors, but his appeal was denied. Now, he is focused on appealing the verdict from prison and believes that justice will eventually be served. He feels an accidental incident took the life of a mother of 3, and an unjust legal system took their father from them. Todd and Amy Mollis's 3 children are now cared for by Amy's family. By the summer of 2016, Annie Hester's life in Gresham, Oregon, seemed to have found peace after years of divorce. But one June night, that peace was torn apart. When police arrived at the scene, they were confronted with a scene so horrific that it stunned even seasoned investigators. The front door was wide open. The belongings hadn't been rummaged through, but on the floor were long streaks of blood leading to Annie's body, stabbed more than 60 times, with many wounds so deep they nearly severed her head. On her shoulder, the killer had carved the letters VXV, a strange sign that no one understood as a message, a symbol, or a challenge. The investigation quickly ruled out robbery or random attack. The crime scene revealed a carefully planned crime, driven by cold hatred and jealousy. What haunted the police most was the way the killer had broken in. Only someone who was too familiar with the apartment could have done so. So who killed Annie Hester? Why did a gentle, hard-working mother who devoted herself to her daughter have to die in such extreme pain? Annie Hester spent her entire life in Gresham, Oregon. Her childhood was difficult. When she was a teenager, her father died, and she relied on her mother and stepfather to get through. Despite the loss, Annie stayed close to her family and remained resilient. Friends and acquaintances describe Annie as trustworthy and determined. She is hardworking, has leadership qualities, and those qualities are reflected in every aspect of life. Her greatest joy, though, came from games. She loved role-playing adventures and cosplay festivals, and was a familiar face at local game shops. In the community of people with similar interests, Annie met Matthew Hester again. They had first met in 1999, when Matthew was married to someone else. Years passed, and they went their separate ways. Then, by chance, they met again at a local game store. This time, Matthew was divorced. From that meeting, they started dating and got married in 2008. In 2011, their daughter, Alice, was born. Annie was overjoyed, but the happiness didn't last. Just 1 year later, Matthew made the very mistake that had ruined his previous marriage: infidelity. Annie tried to forgive him, but the trust was gone. After more lies and broken promises, Annie made a hard choice. She filed for divorce and started over as a single mother. She and Alice moved into a small one-bedroom apartment. Annie gave Alice the bedroom and slept on a mattress in the living room. Annie worked tirelessly. During the day, she cared for children in an after-school program. At night, she worked at a downtown call center. Her dedication paid off, and she eventually became a manager. Still, the long hours took a toll, and Matthew's child support was inconsistent because he frequently changed jobs. Even so, she persevered to ensure that her daughter Alice had everything she needed, even when Matthew remarried. To a woman named Angela, Annie remained polite. The two families occasionally dined together or took Alice out. Annie has always been creative and appreciative of the little things. During Christmas, she made her own decorations and designed cards with Alice's face for her family. On weekends, when Alice was with her father, Annie took on extra work, often painting faces at local events. For her, staying busy was both a way to make a living and a way to express herself. She bore everything with a quiet strength. In the summer of 2016, that strength was tested by a terrible tragedy. One night, police were called to Annie's apartment in Gresham, Oregon. What they found shocked even experienced investigators. The intruder did not enter through the front door, but through Alice's bedroom window. The window air conditioner had been ripped out, and a block was used to push it open. When police arrived, the front door was unlocked. Inside, the apartment was largely undisturbed. No ransacking, no missing items, suggesting robbery wasn't the motive. Blood evidence revealed a brutal attack. Annie was likely asleep when her killer struck. She tried to flee toward the front door but didn't make it. She suffered more than 60 stab wounds. many to her chest and head. The assailant even attempted to decapitate her. On her shoulder, someone had carved 3 letters, VXV. No one knew what they meant. Message, symbol, or a taunt to mislead investigators. 3 knives were found on the carpet, some from Annie's kitchen, and 1 folding knife likely brought by the attacker. Bloody shoe prints led toward the exit. Detectives questioned whether there had been one attacker or more. Alice was safe. She had been staying with Matthew and Angela that night. Had she been home, she might also have been attacked. Neighbors reported disturbing sounds, screams and crashing around 11:15 p.m. Later, loud arguments, slamming doors, and groans that continued past 1 o'clock. AWS. One neighbor turned up the TV to drown out the noise. No one called for help. Only one person finally did, the victim herself, Annie. At 3:00 a.m. gasping for breath and barely able to speak, she managed to dial 911. It was a final act of desperation from a woman fighting for her life. From the first sounds neighbors reported around 11:00 p.m. to the moment Annie called for help, nearly 4 hours passed. Investigators found this deeply alarming. It implied the attack was not brief but prolonged, cruel, and essentially torture. They needed answers, but there were no suspects, no clear motive, and no explanation for the strange VXV symbol carved into Annie's body. The only thing certain, someone was determined to kill her. Police first focused on those closest to Annie. The police contacted Annie's ex-husband, Matthew Hester, and his current wife, Angela, to inform them of Annie's death and invite them to the station. Investigators needed to know about any tension, threats, or disputes. Matthew claimed that Annie had no enemies, that their relationship, though distant, was stable, and that his main concern was the safety of their daughter, Alice. He said he and Angela had been home all night with Alice and Angela's 3 children. They played video games and went to bed around 10:00 p.m. He claimed Angela was beside him the entire time, and she confirmed it. Angela added that she's a light sleeper and would have noticed if Matthew left during the night. However, detectives took note of Matthew's demeanor. He seemed largely unaffected by the violent death of his ex-wife, Annie. He focused on custody issues and Alice's future and described his feelings toward Annie as mostly indifferent, wanting minimal contact with her. Matthew admitted to having an affair during the marriage, but said they had an open arrangement. According to him, Annie also explored polyamory, including a relationship with a couple she met at a pirate-themed role-playing event. Investigators located the couple and cleared them of involvement. Matthew's physical condition also raised questions. He used a cane, walked with a limp, and had obvious health issues. Given the brutality of the crime, more than 60 stab wounds, detectives doubted whether he could have carried out the attack alone. Angela was questioned separately and repeated the story. The two of them went to bed at 10 o'clock, scrolled through their phones, and then fell asleep. The house was always noisy. 4 children, a dog, and a tenant in the garage. Angela's best friend, Karina, who was renting the garage, said she was sure Matthew and Angela were home all night. Karina said she would have heard if a car left the driveway. Both Matthew and Angela voluntarily surrendered their phones, and nothing incriminating was found at that time. With no solid evidence, they were released. Meanwhile, investigators expanded the search. Teams combed the brush along the Springwater Trail with dogs and helicopters. The area had a notorious reputation for crime and illicit substances, causing concern among residents. Many people assumed Annie might have met a dangerous vagrant. But the deeper we delve into Annie's life and her custody battle with Matthew, the less convincing this theory became. Co-parenting had deteriorated, particularly after Angela entered Matthew's life. Angela quickly went from rumor to lover, and tensions with Annie escalated. Angela reportedly didn't want Matthew communicating with Annie, and Matthew pushed for full custody of Alice. The dispute went to court, 1 month before Annie's murder, the court awarded full custody of Alice to Annie. Matthew was ordered to pay more than $13,000 in back child support and nearly $30,000 in legal fees. Neither Matthew nor Angela was employed. The financial pressure and the personal stakes were immense, and Annie had won. Detectives had a pressing question. How would Matthew and Angela pay? Matthew spent most of his time at home, writing fantasy fiction and designing elaborate role-playing games. He and Angela also ran a small YouTube channel sharing his fictional worlds. However, the reality was that they owed Annie thousands of dollars in child support and court fees. While having virtually no income, they explained that they were full-time caregivers for their children, claiming that their children had mental health issues that warranted government benefits and financial assistance. Angela's ex-husband, Aaron, told investigators that her fixation on diagnosing and medicating children had contributed to their divorce. According to Aaron, Angela often insisted her kids needed prescription drugs even when doctors disagreed. Behavior he viewed as dangerous and unnecessary. He also said Angela's attention later turned to Alice, Annie's daughter. Angela became convinced Alice was bipolar, a claim Annie vehemently denied. Annie feared Angela might try to use Alice's name and alleged condition to obtain additional benefits. Experts later validated Annie's concerns. A licensed psychologist explained that labeling normal developmental behaviors as mental illnesses was harmful, and there was no formal diagnostic criteria for bipolar disorder in children under 6. Tensions escalated when Child Protective Services received a report that Annie was neglecting her daughter, Alice. She didn't know who made the call and was devastated. The case was quickly dismissed as unfounded, but the emotional impact was severe. In an email to a friend, she wrote painfully that she did not understand and asked why she had to endure all that. The motives were clear to investigators: child custody, jealousy, and money. 3 powerful reasons. Matthew and Angela could have wanted Annie gone, but motive alone wasn't enough. They still lacked hard evidence. The detectives brought Matthew and Angela back for more questioning. Matthew surprised them by taking off his shirt voluntarily, showing no cuts or scratches. Because Annie fought so hard for her life, detectives believe the killer may have been injured. Matthew insisted he had nothing to hide. He admits people may suspect him, but denies any involvement in Annie's death. Angela was mostly silent, bowing her head and complaining of fatigue. However, she gave new details that contradicted her previous testimony. She now said that around 3:00 a.m., on the night of the murder, she had been awake. She took the dogs outside and suddenly became violently ill, so ill that Matthew had to help her shower and change clothes. This new story put both of them awake and active at the same time. Annie called 911. With no solid evidence, the detectives had to release Matthew and Angela again. But this time, they began secret surveillance. What they found was troubling. Footage showed Matthew moving easily, carrying heavy shopping bags, doing yard work, and walking without a cane. His apparent frailty during interrogation seemed staged. Worse, a neighbor's security camera recorded a vehicle leaving Matthew and Angela's driveway shortly before 1:00 a.m. Heading toward Annie's apartment. Their housemate, Karina, who slept in the garage, had told police she hadn't heard anything. Detectives now wondered if she was protecting them. Contradictions mounted. Matthew and Angela had lied, and their claims of innocence were falling apart. A year on, Annie's family is still waiting for answers. The brutality of her murder made silence unbearable. A reward was offered for information that could bring justice. Months later, the case remained unsolved. Annie's killer was still at large. The pain her family suffered was immeasurable. Her mother later said she would never want another parent to go through the same agony. The grief, the unanswered questions, and Annie's absence left wounds that would not heal. Public appeals followed. Police urged anyone with information to come forward, stressing that the perpetrator had to be found. For Annie's family, Justice was the only path to peace. Meanwhile, Matthew and Angela quietly moved nearly 700 miles away, making it more difficult for them to cooperate in the investigation. But the detectives did not give up. Then came the turning point. DNA samples from the knives seized at the scene were tested. The results were undeniable. Blood and DNA matched Angela. In October 2017, more than a year after Annie's murder, police located Angela in Pocatello, Idaho. She was arrested on 2 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of first-degree theft. When arrested, Angela flew into a rage, screaming that she had young children at home and demanding answers. Detectives stood firm. She was charged with intentionally killing Annie, and prosecutors added an additional charge, alleging torture. If convicted, Angela faced life in prison, and at that time, possibly the death penalty. She pleaded not guilty, insisting she was innocent despite mounting evidence. Detectives then turned to Matthew. They showed him Annie's autopsy photos, hoping to break his ice. At first, Matthew denied any involvement. He later admitted Angela came home the night of the murder covered in blood. He claimed she was panicking, and that he only helped her clean up. He said he didn't know what she had done, though he also acknowledged that he and Angela had previously discussed killing Annie. Matthew then tried to shift blame to Angela's ex-husband, Aaron. Detectives thoroughly questioned Aaron but found no evidence linking him to the crime. He was never charged. Court records reveal the chilling details of the charges against Angela: stabbing Annie more than 60 times, attempting to decapitate her, and carving VXV into her skin. It was a crime defined by rage and cruelty. The strongest incriminating evidence came from her Google Maps search history. 3 days after the murder, Angela looked up a spot in Mount Hood National Forest. Detectives went there and found a boot buried near a tree. It matched a bloody shoe print at the scene. A diver later recovered a plastic bag nearby containing Angela's clothing. The fabric pattern, size, and purchase history directly linked her. The evidence was overwhelming. As investigators dug deeper, they found another disturbing detail. Annie had a $100,000 life insurance policy, naming her parents as beneficiaries. Shortly after her death, someone called the insurance company, not her parents, but Matthew, asking if he could receive the payout. When told no information could be provided, he hung up. By 2019, prosecutors expanded the case. Matthew was charged with 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, 1 count of solicitation to commit murder, and 1 count of hindering prosecution. He pleaded not guilty, like Angela, but the evidence grew. In 2020, Angela changed her plea and admitted to second-degree murder. Oregon law had changed by then, eliminating the possibility of the death penalty. But she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Matthew's case concluded later. In 2021, he pleaded guilty to soliciting Angela's brother to commit murder and to hindering prosecution. His sentence was considered light, given the severity of the case. Just 56 months. Less than 5 years. Many criticized the outcome, but prosecutors called it strategic. If stronger evidence later emerged against Matthew, they could still prosecute him for conspiracy to commit murder. If he was acquitted, that would not be possible. Angela and Matthew divorced while incarcerated. Angela has not spoken publicly about Annie since her arrest. Angela's child was placed in foster care, and Alice was adopted by Annie's mother. Alice finally found the safety and love in the family Annie had always wanted for her. Those who had worked with Annie remembered her not only as a victim, she was an inspiration, a tireless worker who shouldered many hardships yet still brought joy to others. Her positivity, even in her darkest moments, left a lasting mark. In her final moments, Annie reflected what she always embodied: strength, resilience, and a fierce will to fight. Anna Sablina, the familiar voice of radio host Vologda, was once a symbol of confidence and success. But after the sudden death of the man she'd been with for over 10 years, her world fell silent, revealing a void unseen by anyone. It was in this solitude that another man entered her life. He was gentle, caring, and appeared at Anna's weakest moment. But behind that facade of concern lay instability, jealousy, and rages she didn't recognize. On the night of January 2nd, 2023, in a brightly lit Moscow apartment, that gentleness vanished in minutes. When the police broke down the door, they were confronted with a horrifying scene. Anna lay motionless with hundreds of stab wounds, and beside her was the man she had once trusted, drunk, covered in blood, and unable to explain what had just happened. What really happened in that locked room, and why were the warning signs ignored until it was too late? The story of Anna Sablina is not just a case. It's a chilling reminder of how tragedy can silently grow in the very moments we believe we are loved. Anna Sablina was born in 1988 in Vologda, Russia, into a family of educators. Her father, a doctor of history, worked at a university dedicated to regional studies, while her mother was also active in the education sector. Their home was marked by order, discipline, and high expectations for their children. From a young age, Anna stood out for her confidence on stage. She sang, acted in school productions, and frequently hosted school events. Her friends recognized her ability to captivate audiences, and this talent paved the way for her career in media. Unlike many of her peers, Anna always knew what she wanted: a career in radio. In 2006, she entered Vologda State University to study journalism. During her first year, she landed an internship at Russian Radio Vologda, where her distinct voice drew immediate attention. The station soon invited her to host live shows while continuing her studies. Around that time, she adopted her on-air pseudonym, Azovskaya, a catchy name that listeners quickly recognized. By 2011, upon graduating, Anna had become a well-known voice throughout Vologda. Many people listened to her daily, in their cars, in their offices, or at home. Her rapid rise was the result of both talent and determination. Anna's career was stable, but her life changed after she met Vasily Solovyov in 2009. He was a successful businessman from Cherepovets, running several companies, including the radio station where Anna worked. He was nearly 20 years older than her, known for his calm demeanor and high work efficiency. Their relationship began professionally but soon developed into something more personal. Vasily admired Anna's ambition and actively supported her career. He gifted her a car, arranged housing for her in Moscow on Polina Osipenko Street, and helped her find accommodation in Cherepovets and Vologda. These gifts clearly demonstrated his desire for a long-term future with her. Despite their age difference, their relationship remained strong. They kept their romance private, only sharing it with a few close friends. Friends described it as a balanced relationship, not the typical story of a wealthy man and a young woman in the media industry. Anna remained independent and continued advancing her career, never relying solely on Vasily's financial support. Their partnership lasted for over a decade. By the early 2022s, they began to think about a shared future. But in 2021, everything changed suddenly. Vasily fell seriously ill, had to be put on a ventilator, and passed away in June of that same year at the age of 51. Vasily's death was a huge shock to Anna. She became withdrawn, stopping sharing her future plans. Colleagues noticed that the confidence and energy that once defined her seemed to fade. This marked the beginning of a decline in her emotional well-being, which would later profoundly affect her life. After Vasily's death, Anna continued to work, but only what was necessary. Work no longer brought her joy, only daily responsibilities. She gradually withdrew from social life, avoiding meeting and talking with friends. Colleagues noticed she rarely smiled and evaded questions about her personal life. For Anna, this period of loneliness and instability made her increasingly vulnerable to such influences. Throughout 2022, her situation did not improve. She maintained a composed image at work, but privately she struggled with exhaustion and a lingering sense of loss. The stability she once found through Vasily was gone. Replaced by routine and solitude, her world had become small and quiet. During this fragile time, she longed for support but couldn't express it. Emotional emptiness often opens the door to new relationships that feel like a reprieve, a chance to regain balance. This unresolved grief and persistent isolation became the setting for a new connection that would soon shape the next chapter of her life. By late 2022, someone new entered Anna's life, a man who, at first, seemed completely unconnected to her. Vladimir Maklakov, 33, was a local and the son of one of Vasily's old acquaintances. His family owned a large logging company. Although Vladimir was officially its CEO, everyone knew his father managed the real business operations. Locals described Vladimir as someone who did whatever he wanted without worrying about the consequences. His habits were the opposite of Anna's orderly lifestyle. He was known to drink heavily, sometimes acted aggressively, and had a reputation for volatile relationships. Longtime acquaintances said that he had been through many tumultuous relationships, often argued with others, and was also suspected of using substances. Some people affirm that Vladimir's first marriage fell apart after only a few months, and his later relationship ended when the woman left him, taking their son with her. These behaviors indicated impulsiveness, a lack of self-control, and an unstable lifestyle. Meanwhile, Anna was organized, calm, and devoted to her work. A complete contrast to him. Ironically, it was this difference that allowed Vladimir to win her trust quickly. He overwhelmed her with attention, compliments, gifts, and promises of support. For someone still grieving a deep personal loss, that kind of reassurance must have felt like a lifeline. At the time, Anna was emotionally fragile, which made her more susceptible to his influence. Still, she kept the relationship private, whether it was out of discretion or awareness that others might disapprove. She never spoke openly about it. But this was the beginning of a romance that would later turn tragic, because they kept things hidden. Warning signs remained unnoticed until everything escalated. After several months, Vladimir's troubling behavior became obvious. Under the influence, he turned loud and unpredictable, lashing out over trivial matters. Those who knew him said such outbursts were typical of him. Anna rarely discussed these issues directly, but a close friend later remembered small hints. Anna seemed constantly exhausted, avoided details about her relationship, and often changed the subject. These behaviors indicated their relationship was no longer stable. All of this described a man who was unstable and difficult to predict. So why didn't Anna see the warning signs? Their relationship followed a familiar pattern, a phase of caring, promises, then arguments and outbursts of emotion. This was followed by apologies, promises to change, and overflowing displays of affection to make amends. This cycle left Anna both insecure and hopeful that things would get better. In her vulnerable moments, any act of kindness from Vladimir provided Anna with a sense of security. That's why she keeps staying by his side, a moody man, yet one who occasionally shows the tenderness she needs. Gradually, this dynamic shaped their relationship, while the warning signs became increasingly obscured. By the end of December 2022, Anna and Vladimir had gone through many tense periods, but they still decided to celebrate the new year together. For Anna, this was likely a chance to start fresh, to find peace as 2023 began. They traveled to Moscow and stayed in the apartment on Polina Osipenko Street, the same one Vasily had once given to Anna. Vladimir later told investigators that they had rented the apartment, which wasn't true. Perhaps he wanted to downplay his place in the relationship. From late December until January 2nd, there were no visible signs of conflict. They took walks, went to cafes, and even took photos together. On January 2nd, they had a professional photo session. The photographer recalled that the couple looked relaxed and comfortable, showing no tension. In those pictures, they appeared like any other couple, enjoying the holidays, cheerful, calm, and unaware of what was about to happen. That day turned out to be Anna's last. After the photo shoot, they returned to the apartment for a quiet evening. Everything seemed normal, a peaceful holiday night in Moscow. Dinner, conversation, and rest. But in the hours that followed, that calm would unravel, revealing something much darker beneath the surface. What could have been a new beginning instead became the prelude to tragedy. The evening began peacefully, with small talk and future plans. After that, the topic of their conversation shifted to their future, a subject that both of them had been thinking about for a long time. For Vladimir, it was time to assert his position. He unexpectedly proposed, without any prior preparation or discussion. He saw it as a way to solidify the relationship, to assert control. But Anna didn't share his view. She calmly refused, explaining that she wasn't ready to commit to a lifetime with someone who behaved erratically. There was no shouting, no argument, no emotional outburst, and that quiet, composed refusal became the turning point. Perhaps Vladimir understood that calmness as indifference, the very thing he feared most. He viewed the rejection as an insult, even a betrayal. That night, he had been drinking, further destabilizing his emotions and making him more prone to losing control. The conversation quickly became tense. His voice grew louder, his attitude aggressive, and then it erupted into violence. When Anna tried to leave, Vladimir blocked her way. She ran into the bathroom, the only place she could close the door to hide. But the door was weak, the lock unable to withstand the pressure. Just seconds later, the door was broken down. That moment marked the beginning of 3 horrific minutes that forensic experts later meticulously recreated. The autopsy report showed Anna was stabbed 247 times, a number that speaks volumes, reflecting a complete breakdown of control and frenzy. The report emphasized that there were no pauses, a clear sign of extreme emotional disturbance at the time of the attack. It's important to note how quickly everything unfolded. The timeline laid out by the forensic team underscores just how rapidly the situation deteriorated. During those moments, neighbors began hearing noises. First, dull thuds, then sharp cries that soon turned into muffled sounds of a struggle. Several residents called emergency services around the same time, reporting signs of violence. However, records later showed that the rescue team responded slower than the standard response time for this type of situation. That delay became a major focus of the investigation. When officers finally arrived, the apartment door was locked, forcing them to break in. Inside, they found Vladimir lying near Anna's body. He was drunk, his clothes stained with blood, but he offered no resistance when apprehended. His speech rambling and incoherent, his first words were included in the official report. He said he hadn't meant for things to go that far. His behavior was erratic, alternating between confused explanations and total detachment. At that point, investigators had the basic outline of the case, the scene, the weapon, and the suspect found on site. Still, key questions remained about how the incident unfolded, how long it took for help to arrive, and how much alcohol had influenced Vladimir's actions. These details would become central to reconstructing what happened that night and shaping the investigation's direction. News of Anna's death spread quickly in the cities where her voice was well known, and in Moscow. Her colleagues in radio were shocked, describing her as dedicated and professional, qualities that made her death all the more tragic. National media began reiterating the pressures Anna faced after Vasily Solovyov's death, and the mental anguish she experienced. Many theories were put forward, from personal conflicts to issues of inheritance from Vasily. But all remained speculation. Lacking concrete evidence, the trial began with a confession. Vladimir admitted to the attack but tried to present it as the result of an emotional breakdown, hoping for leniency. He was charged with 2 counts causing serious injury, resulting in death and unlawful entry with violence. During the trial, Vladimir's demeanor was markedly different from the night of the crime. He appeared calm, expressed remorse, and claimed he acted under extreme emotional distress. His lawyer emphasized his voluntary confession and the fact that he never tried to flee, arguing this should reduce his sentence. The defense also presented a letter of confirmation from his hometown and previous records of alcohol addiction treatment, aiming to portray him as someone who had tried to change but failed in a moment of weakness. The entire strategy was geared towards depicting the incident as a moment of loss of control, rather than a premeditated crime. After considering the nature of the incident, the timing, and the forensic findings, the court sentenced Vladimir Maklakov to 14 years in a high-security facility. For Anna's family, the verdict brought mixed feelings. The punishment was significant, yet it still felt insufficient compared to the magnitude of their loss. Anna's parents filed a civil suit seeking 5 million rubles in damages. Their goal was not financial gain but formal acknowledgement of responsibility. Meanwhile, Vladimir's attempts to portray himself as a victim of circumstances were seen as an evasion of responsibility. The court's decision officially closed the case, but many questions remained about the choices, warning signs, and missed opportunities that led to a tragedy that might have been prevented. After his conviction, Vladimir's future seemed sealed. He would face many years in prison under strict conditions with little hope of pardon. Yet soon after, his lawyer submitted a petition for him to join a military deployment under a special operations contract, a legal option that allows inmates to replace most of their sentence with military service. The petition was approved, and Vladimir joined a group chosen for accelerated training before deployment. His participation in this program later became grounds for early release. By 2025, just 2 years later, he was back home. News of his release shocked many in Vologda. Residents vividly remembered the details of the crime and did not expect someone guilty of such a serious offense to be freed so quickly. For many, this was surprising, especially for those who believed that justice meant the full execution of the sentence. Upon his return, Vladimir moved near his family. According to people who knew him, he helped his father with daily tasks and deliberately stayed away from public places where he might be recognized. Before long, rumors spread that he was seeing someone new, igniting renewed public discussion. The contrast between Vladimir's quiet new life and the grief still felt by Anna's family was striking. There are no public records of his employment, and open sources do not reveal whether he plans to continue his military service or move elsewhere. What is clear is that he maintains a low profile and avoids any public involvement in matters related to his case. Legally, he faces no special restrictions other than periodically registering at his official place of residence. For Anna's mother, however, his release was devastating. She could not comprehend how the man responsible for her daughter's death was now free. The gap between the court's sentence and the time actually served stirred strong public concern. Many questioned whether the system truly reflects society's expectations for justice in such serious cases. Thus, the story reached its final chapter, one where the legal verdict became only part of a larger, more painful discussion about fairness, justice, and the lasting weight of consequences. One day, in the store, the woman walked toward the back area and stumbled upon a horrifying scene. The body of a woman lying in a pool of blood. She was shaken to her core. What intensified her terror was the realization that she had seen this woman alive in the store only hours earlier. fighting the urge to scream. She slowly backed away from the body, only to bump into someone behind her. Ginger Rios was born in Las Vegas, Nevada, to Denise and George Rios. She grew up alongside her sister, Daniela, in a close-knit family. From a young age, Ginger was vibrant, energetic, full of ambition. She loved music, dancing, and singing, often spoke of performing on stage one day. As a child, she once promised her mother that if she pursued the arts, she would someday become Miss Las Vegas. Ginger thrived in social settings, lighting up every room she entered. Her intelligence, warmth, and charisma made her unforgettable to those who knew her. As she grew older, Ginger pursued her passion professionally, working as a backup dancer in a show called The Salsa Machine. When she was 20 years old, she met Mark Hollinger, who was 34 at the time. Despite the age difference, Ginger was confident and mature beyond her years. Her parents initially had concerns, but ultimately approved of Mark after seeing how happy and secure Ginger was with him. Their bond formed quickly and deeply. Eventually, they got married and moved in together, determined to build a stable future, especially with thoughts of eventually starting a family. Ginger decided to look for a book that could help them improve their credit. This was 1997, long before financial advice was readily available online. On April 4, 1997, Ginger and Mark were driving along Maryland Parkway in Las Vegas when they noticed the familiar storefront of Spycraft. The store stood out immediately, its windows filled with cameras and unusual equipment. Spycraft was part of a chain with multiple locations across the western United States and was known for selling surveillance devices, tracking tools, and books on specialized topics. Mark stayed in the car while Ginger went inside. She planned only a quick stop to browse. She took nothing with her except her wallet, leaving the rest of her belongings in the vehicle. Spycraft attracted all kinds of customers. Some were simply curious or concerned parents, but others had more questionable motives, looking for devices that could be used without drawing attention. At the time, the store was operated by Craig Leslie Jacobson and his wife. Minutes passed, then more time. Ginger didn't return. Mark waited in the parking lot, watching the entrance carefully. If Ginger had stepped outside, he would have seen her, but she never emerged from the front door. Anxiety began to creep into him. Ginger's delay was completely out of character, especially since they still had errands to run. Finally, Mark got out of the car, entered the store. He went straight to the counter and asked about Ginger, wanting to know whether she was still inside. The response stunned him. Jacobson told Mark that Ginger had already made a purchase and left the store some time earlier. Mark knew immediately that this wasn't true. Alarmed, Mark began searching the store aisle by aisle, calling her name. Ginger was nowhere to be found. Clearly, something bad has happened. Mark returned to the store owners, pleading with them to help locate his wife. Jacobson repeated the same story, insisting that Ginger had made a purchase and already left the store. This response only deepened Mark's confusion and growing sense of dread. With no other options, he left the shop and called his in-laws, reaching George Rios, Ginger's father, to tell him that she was missing. George initially suggested that Ginger might have stepped into a nearby store and that Mark may simply have missed her leaving. At first, George was not overly alarmed. But as the hours passed and there was still no sign of Ginger, concern quickly turned into fear. This behavior was completely out of character for her. She would never disappear without saying anything. Adding to the worry, Ginger's bag was still in the car with Mark, and the only thing she had taken with her was her wallet, which contained very little cash. It became increasingly clear that she had not left voluntarily. Both George and Mark realized they needed to report Ginger missing. Sensing that something serious had happened that evening, George and Mark returned to the Spycraft store, hoping to review the surveillance footage to track Ginger's movements. When they arrived, the shop was closed. Craig Jacobson and his wife were outside near a van. Mark and George approached them, asked to see the security footage. Jacobson said he were busy at the moment and told them to come back over the weekend if they wanted to view it. There was nothing more they could do that night. Though Mark and George went their separate ways, Ginger's disappearance hung over them like a dark cloud. By the following Monday, she was officially reported missing to the police. Detectives immediately noted how unusual the situation was. At first, they considered whether Ginger might have run away, but a review of her bank accounts quickly ruled that out. Her money remained untouched, exactly as it had been on the day she vanished. Ginger also carried very little cash, making it unlikely she could have gone anywhere intentionally. With that possibility eliminated, investigators began assembling a list of potential suspects. As is standard procedure, Mark Hollinger was among the first people scrutinized. What puzzled the investigators was Mark's reaction when Ginger went missing. Instead of contacting the police immediately, he had called her father first. From a law enforcement perspective, this hesitation seemed suspicious. Then, just days after Ginger's disappearance, something even more unusual occurred. Mark's car caught fire and was completely destroyed. Police viewed the incident with deep suspicion, believing the fire was unlikely to have been accidental. Investigators began to suspect that the vehicle may have been deliberately set ablaze to destroy potential evidence. Eventually, police conducted a thorough investigation into Mark. Throughout questioning, he remained firm, insisting he had nothing to do with Ginger's disappearance and claiming he was just as desperate to find her as everyone else. As for the fire, Mark explained that the car had overheated while he was driving home and suddenly burst into flames. He said he barely managed to escape as the fire spread rapidly. By the time he tried to react, the flames were out of control. At the time, cell phones were not widely used, and finding a payphone was not always easy. The burned-out car was seized and carefully examined for any evidence that might shed light on Ginger's disappearance. With no evidence tying him to a crime, Mark was ultimately released. As days passed without any sign of Ginger, investigators faced a difficult truth. Something had definitely happened to her. Police shifted their focus to Spycraft, the store where Ginger Rios had last been seen alive. Investigators wanted to review the store's surveillance footage, but quickly ran into obstacles. Craig Leslie Jacobson, the store's owner, was reportedly in Phoenix, Arizona, overseeing another location. Without him present, officers were unable to access any video recordings. Even so, they decided to examine the premises themselves. When officers entered the bathroom at the back of the store, they were immediately struck by a strong odor of bleach. On the wall, they noticed a single, tiny red stain. Though small, it appeared suspicious. When questioned, Jacobson quickly offered an explanation. He claimed that his dog had made a mess in the bathroom and that he had used bleach to eliminate the odor. He further insisted that the stain on the wall was also caused by the dog. In 1997, DNA technology was limited, and such a small trace was difficult to analyze with certainty. When asked again about Ginger, Jacobson repeated the same story he had told Mark. But when officers asked him to produce either the video or the receipt, he was unable to do so. Whether this was due to deception or poor record-keeping, it raised serious red flags. Investigators sensed that something was wrong, but without concrete evidence, they couldn't do anything. With no progress at the store, police turned their attention to Ginger's work as a performer. They explored the possibility that she might have been stalked or targeted by someone unstable. Despite following multiple leads, this line of inquiry led nowhere. By then, nearly a month had passed since Ginger vanished, and the investigation was at a standstill. There were no solid leads, no reliable witnesses, no answers. A few months later, a woman came forward to provide information. Her testimony would finally provide clarity about what had happened. The woman's name was Cheryl. She was Craig Leslie Jacobson's wife at the time. Cheryl revealed critical details that investigators had never heard before. When asked why she had remained silent for so long, she said she feared what he might do if she spoke up, especially because she was the one who had found Ginger. Cheryl believed that speaking out could put both her and her infant child in grave danger. According to Cheryl, from the moment Ginger entered the store, Craig's attention became disturbingly fixated on her. She described his stare as intense and unsettling, as though he couldn't take his eyes off Ginger. Shortly after Ginger arrived, Craig ordered Cheryl to retrieve something from the back of the store, something he frequently did, often barking commands without explanation. Cheryl went to the back as instructed. When she returned a few minutes later, Ginger was gone. At first, Cheryl assumed Ginger had simply made her purchase and left. Around that same time, Mark entered the store, visibly worried, asking where his wife was. Cheryl genuinely didn't know what to tell him. After Mark left, however, Jacobson warned her not to go into the storage area at the back of the store. Despite her fear, Cheryl decided to go back anyway. When she opened the door, she nearly screamed. Ginger was lying on the floor, motionless. As Cheryl staggered backward in shock, she ran directly into Jacobson. An encounter straight out of a nightmare. He stepped close to her and threatened her, warning that if she ever told anyone what she had seen, both she and her baby would suffer the consequences. Cheryl later told investigators that Jacobson confessed to her what he had done while she was away. According to her account, he had grabbed Ginger from behind and attacked her, killing her inside the store. He offered no explanation, no justification. The horror of Ginger's final moments was almost impossible to comprehend. A young woman, alone in a store, brutally attacked, killed by a man she had never met, while help was just feet away, and no one knew. Cheryl recalled that, to conceal the crime, Craig Jacobson, along with another employee, thoroughly cleaned the back room of the Spycraft store using large amounts of bleach. Afterward, Jacobson placed Ginger's body into a van, the very same van beside which he and Cheryl had been standing when Mark and George came searching for Ginger. That night, Ginger's husband and father had unknowingly stood just feet away from her lifeless body. Even more devastating was the fact that Cheryl knew exactly where Ginger was at that moment. But fear kept her silent in her husband's presence. Cheryl told police that about a month later, she, Jacobson, and their infant child traveled to Arizona desert, where Jacobson buried Ginger's body in a remote desert area inside a wooden box. Authorities eventually discovered a body in the desert, but at the time, it could not be positively identified as Ginger. When Jacobson learned that remains had been found, he immediately fled. It was ultimately Cheryl who led investigators to the precise location where Ginger's body had been concealed. The remains were found buried beneath sand and concrete. Later, forensic testing confirmed that the body belonged to 20-year-old Ginger Rios. Following this discovery, police obtained a search warrant for the Spycraft store. Inside, investigators found traces of Ginger's DNA in the back room. An even more disturbing revelation soon followed. Craig Leslie Jacobson was a fugitive with an extensive criminal history. Years earlier, Jacobson had fled under an alias to avoid prosecution for burglary and theft. After serving time, he changed his name again, married Cheryl, and continued operating Spycraft stores across several western states, including a location in a Las Vegas strip mall. It remains unclear whether Cheryl was aware of the full extent of his criminal past. Investigators also uncovered troubling patterns. Reports indicated that Jacobson often fixated on women with dark hair. One young man later claimed that Jacobson had paid him to photograph such women. In August 1997, Jacobson was arrested in Los Angeles following a confrontation with a police officer. Though details of that incident were limited, he was quickly extradited back to Nevada and formally charged with Ginger's murder. During legal proceedings, Jacobson ultimately confessed to killing Ginger, claiming that he suffered from schizophrenia and displaying erratic behavior. Prosecutors, however, argued that he was not mentally ill and was deliberately feigning symptoms in an attempt to secure a lighter sentence. Reports from within the prison system suggested that Jacobson had openly discussed plans to pretend insanity in order to manipulate the courts. Although prosecutors initially considered seeking the death penalty, they eventually offered Jacobson a plea agreement, which he accepted. Under the terms of the deal, Jacobson was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years and ordered to pay approximately $3,200 in restitution to Ginger's family. There was, however, another chilling discovery. Another set of remains was found in the desert near Ginger's burial place. Years later, authorities identified her as Christina Marie Martinez, a teenager believed to have also been killed by Jacobson. Christina was 15 years old when she disappeared in May 1987, after visiting a nearby laundromat. She lived in a group home in Arizona, located across the street from a branch of the Spycraft store. Tragically, no immediate large-scale search was launched for Christina, likely due to her troubled background and prior encounters with law enforcement. She went missing for many years before her body was found in the desert. In 2015, after completing his sentence in Nevada, Jacobson was extradited to Arizona to face charges related to Christina's murder. In 2016, a judge in Maricopa County Superior Court initially ruled Craig Jacobson mentally incompetent to stand trial. That decision was later reversed, with the court concluding that he had been exaggerating or feigning mental illness. On September 21, 2017, judge approved a defense request for an additional competency evaluation. Since then, there have been no significant public updates in the case. Craig Leslie Jacobson remains incarcerated. Investigators have long suspected that Ginger Rios and Christina Marie Martinez may not have been his only victims. In May 1997, he was also suspected in the disappearance and possible murder of another young woman, Mary Stoddard, whose body has never been recovered. The death of Ginger left a deep and permanent scar on her family, who continued to carry the weight of their grief long after the case was closed. At one point, Craig Jacobson even wrote letters to Ginger's father, expressing remorse for the pain he had caused. In those letters, he claimed he attacked Ginger because she had supposedly snapped at him inside the store that day. But nothing in his explanation could justify murder. Tragically, Ginger's mother, Denise Rios, passed away from cancer on July 24, 2014, carrying with her the unbearable pain of losing her daughter years earlier. Her passing left Ginger's father, George Rios, and her sister, Daniela, to navigate their grief alone. The only comfort they found was believing that Ginger and Denise were together again in a place free from suffering. Ginger had been looking forward to her future. She dreamed of owning a home with her husband, raising children, and watching her family grow. She hoped to perform on stage, to dance, to sing, and to build the creative life she had always imagined. But she never had the chance to reach those dreams. Her life was stolen at just 20 years old, long before she could see any of it unfold. Hope Melton was reported missing the day after Christmas. A few weeks later, her body was found. Between her disappearance and the discovery of her body lies a terrifying silence. No witnesses, no cries for help, no sign that anything had gone wrong. She left home, drove down a familiar road, and simply vanished. When police located her car, it was abandoned in a remote area, locked, undisturbed, with no signs of struggle, no blood, nothing to explain her disappearance. All of her belongings remained inside, only hope was gone. Then, when her body was found in the woods, The case transformed from a baffling disappearance into a chilling murder investigation. The question no longer was where she was, but who had taken her from that road and how they had done it, unseen, in broad daylight. The call comes in the afternoon, quiet and ordinary. December 26, 2011. Hope Melton is on the line with her grandmother, speaking from her car somewhere along a rural South Carolina road. Her voice sounds calm, nothing urgent. She says she is driving back to her home in Conway after Christmas with her family. It is the last confirmed conversation anyone will ever have with her. That fact is simple and uncontested. The time, the date, the call record. According to the investigation file, the phone disconnects normally. No distress signal, no raised voice, just an ending, and then silence. Hope Melton is 27 years old and lives alone. She has a job and stays in contact with her family. She isn't the type to vanish without a word. So, when she doesn't come home that night, no one worries at first. Travel can be delayed by long distances, dead phone batteries, or bad weather. However, as the hours turn into a full day, concern begins to grow. By December 27, family members begin calling again and again. The phone no longer rings, it goes straight to voicemail. That change is noted later by investigators as a key behavioral break. A device that had been active is now unreachable. Something has altered the pattern. Hope's family reports her missing to law enforcement. Officers take down details, her car, her route, the last call. They mark the timeline starting with that brief conversation. It becomes the anchor point. Everything before it is known. Everything after it is uncertain. Hope's car is a white Pontiac G6. According to traffic data and gas station receipts reviewed later, she had been traveling alone. No confirmed passengers. No known conflicts that day. No messages suggesting fear. The absence of warning becomes part of the mystery. In the days that follow, investigators begin retracing the route Hope likely took. They canvass gas stations. They ask for surveillance footage. They drive the same roads. The landscape is wide and quiet. Pine trees, long stretches without witnesses. A place where someone can vanish without noise. Everyone is waiting, hoping Hope Melton isn't harmed. Officially, she's still just a missing person. But with each passing hour, the situation looks more and more grim. The last call is not dramatic. That is what makes it unsettling. It offers no explanation, no clue. Just a timestamp and a voice that fades. If nothing was wrong when Hope Melton hung up the phone, then what happened in the minutes that followed? Hope Melton, before becoming a missing person case, led a predictable life. She lived in the small, familiar city of Conway, South Carolina, and worked as a waitress. People who knew her described her as reliable. She was punctual and responsive. When she disappeared, investigators found no clear warning signs. There were no recent violent breakups, sudden money gains, or reported threats to explain her disappearance. This lack of obvious risk factors only deepened the mystery. Hope is close to her family, especially her grandmother. Phone records later confirm regular contact. Nothing in the days leading up to December 26 suggests she is preparing to leave or disappear. She has plans, shifts to work, personal belongings left at home. According to the investigation file, there is no packed luggage, no farewell messages, and no withdrawals from her bank account after she vanishes. On Christmas Day, she visits relatives. It is unremarkable. No arguments reported. No witnesses describe tension. The next day, she gets into her car and drives back toward Conway. This is not a long journey. It is a route she knows. One she has driven before. The deviation happens quietly. She does not arrive. As police begin assembling her background, they find no indication she was seeking new connections. Her social circle is small. Familiar faces, co-workers, family. According to statements later reviewed in court, no one reports her expressing fear of a specific individual. That detail matters because early investigations often start closest to home: romantic partners, friends, family members. In Hope Melton's case, those avenues yield little. Alibis check out, timelines hold. There is no immediate suspect. The environment around her disappearance is deceptively calm. There are no witnesses calling in dramatic sightings. No screaming was reported along the roadway. No abandoned belongings were found in the first searches. Just a woman who did not return from a drive she should have completed easily. Investigators begin to understand that if something happened to Hope, it likely happened fast. A brief encounter, a narrow window, possibly with someone she did not know. That realization shifts the tone of the case. Randomness enters the equation, and with it, fear. Not just for Hope, but for anyone else traveling those roads. Investigators reconstruct Hope's final journey using fragments, gas station records, traffic flow. Surveillance cameras are mounted high above convenience store doors. According to the investigation file, Hope is captured on video at a gas station in Loris, South Carolina. The footage shows her alone. She appears composed. No visible distress. She pays. She leaves. This image matters. It confirms movement, direction, time. It narrows the window. From that point, the road stretches into rural quiet. Long distances, few cameras, sparse lighting, a place where chance encounters happen without record. Police map out where Hope should have gone next. They drive it themselves, mile by mile. The terrain offers little resistance to disappearance. Days after Hope is reported missing, her white Pontiac G6 is found abandoned in a remote area of Horry County. The location is not random. It is off the main road, secluded. According to law enforcement statements, the vehicle is locked. There are no obvious signs of a struggle visible from the outside. No shattered glass. No blood immediately apparent. Inside the vehicle, investigators find her personal items, purse, identification. According to police reports, nothing suggests she planned to leave the car voluntarily and walk away. Her phone is not recovered with the vehicle. The broken road is not just physical, it is narrative. The car's placement suggests control. Someone knew where to leave it. Someone wanted time. Law enforcement begins widening the search area. K-9 units, ground teams, helicopters. But the landscape resists clarity. Dense woods, swamps, private land. Each hour without a discovery compounds the pressure. At this stage, investigators face a critical uncertainty. Did Hope encounter someone she trusted, or someone she had never seen before? There are no defensive wounds documented yet, no forensic confirmation of violence, only absence. The case begins attracting public attention. Tips come in, most lead nowhere. According to investigators, there is no credible sighting of Hope after the gas station footage. The road has taken her somewhere, but it refuses to say where. And with her car recovered and her trail gone cold, the investigation turns outward away from Hope's life and toward a stranger's. With Hope's car recovered and no sign of her nearby, investigators are forced to confront a hard truth early in the case. Whatever happened did not end where the vehicle was left. According to law enforcement statements, search teams comb the surrounding area for days. Dogs track scents that fade into nothing. Helicopters scan tree lines that reveal no movement. The land absorbs evidence easily. The fact is clear. Hope is not here. Police shift strategy. They stop looking only for Hope and start looking for patterns. They re-examine the car. They document every item inside. They log what is missing, her phone. Small details that might not matter alone, but together suggest interruption rather than choice. Family members wait nearby, watching the search expand and contract like a pulse. Each discovery that is not Hope feels like a loss repeated. Investigators canvass nearby businesses again. They pull additional surveillance footage. They request help from the public. According to the investigation file, one key breakthrough does not come from the woods but from a camera. A gas station surveillance review reveals a dark-colored SUV traveling through the same area around the same time Hope was last seen. The footage is grainy, faces are unclear, but the vehicle stands out because it appears repeatedly. It is not confirmed at this stage whether the SUV interacted with Hope, but proximity alone is enough to elevate interest. Detectives start tracking similar vehicles registered in the area. It is slow work, hundreds of possibilities. Most were ruled out quickly. Others linger longer. According to police records, no immediate suspect emerges, but the idea of a random encounter solidifies. Meanwhile, the search for Hope continues beyond the road. Investigators receive tips about remote properties, abandoned buildings, rural paths. Each lead is checked, most go nowhere. Then, weeks later, the case reaches its most devastating discovery. Hope's remains are found in a wooded area of Horry County. The location is remote. According to official statements, the site is not easily accessible and suggests deliberate placement. An autopsy later confirms she died from a gunshot wound. The manner of death is ruled a homicide. At this point, the atmosphere turns heavy. The uncertainty ends. The question of where Hope is becomes replaced by why she was taken and who decided she would not return. With confirmation of murder, the investigation sharpens. Evidence is no longer speculative. It demands a name, and somewhere in the system vehicle records, surveillance footage, witness memory, that name already exists. Who was behind the wheel of that SUV? After Hope's remains are identified and the case is officially classified as homicide, detectives return to the evidence already collected. They look again at the surveillance footage, the dark SUV, the timing, the repeated appearances. According to the investigation file, the vehicle is not just passing through. It lingers within the same corridor Hope traveled. That pattern matters. Investigators begin matching vehicle descriptions against registration records in the region. Make, model, color, prior stops. This process takes weeks. Many names surface and disappear again. Most owners have verifiable alibis, work records, witnesses, receipts. One does not. The name is Nicholas Jermaine Miller. Miller is 22 years old at the time. He lives in the area. He owns a dark-colored SUV consistent with the one seen on camera. According to law enforcement statements, his movements on December 26 do not fully account for the window when Hope Melton vanished. Gaps appear. Small, but significant. Detectives bring him in for questioning. At first, Miller denies involvement. He acknowledges being in the area but claims he did not encounter Hope. This is not unusual. Many interviews end here. This one does not. According to court records, investigators confronted him with surveillance images and timeline inconsistencies. The pressure increases slowly. Then the story changes. Miller begins to admit contact. He tells investigators he encountered Hope while she was driving. According to his statement, he offered assistance. What happens next is reconstructed through confession, physical evidence, and later forensic confirmation. Prosecutors state that Miller abducted Hope, drove her to a remote location, and shot her. This is the first moment the case fully pivots. The disappearance is no longer ambiguous. It is targeted, violent, final. Investigators corroborate Miller's confession with physical evidence. Ballistics, location consistency, surveillance alignment. According to the prosecution, the account matches what is known and fills in what was missing. Miller is arrested and charged with murder and kidnapping. For Hope Melton's family, the emergence of a suspect does not bring relief. It brings clarity without comfort. The randomness they feared is confirmed. There was no long-standing connection, no warning signs, just proximity and opportunity. Once Nicholas Jermaine Miller is in custody, the investigation stops expanding and begins closing in on itself. Loose ends are tied. Statements are formalized. Evidence is logged for the court. According to prosecutors, Miller's confession becomes the spine of the case, but it is not treated as sufficient on its own. Every detail is tested against what can be proven. The facts align, the route, the timing, the location where Hope's body was found. Ballistic evidence confirms the cause of death as a gunshot wound. Investigators establish that Hope did not know Miller. There is no prior connection, no digital trail linking them before that day. The encounter is, by all available evidence, random. That randomness becomes central in the courtroom. Miller is charged with murder and kidnapping. The state initially seeks the death penalty. According to court records, the prosecution argues that Hope was abducted from her vehicle, transported against her will, and killed in a remote area to eliminate a witness. The defense does not dispute that Miller caused her death. Instead, it focuses on mitigation. Mental health enters the record. Defense attorneys present evidence that Miller had a history of intellectual disability and psychological limitations. Evaluations are conducted. Experts testify. According to the proceedings, these factors influence how the case moves forward, not in determining guilt, but in determining punishment. Hope Melton's family is present. They listen to details they did not ask to know. The confession removes uncertainty, but it replaces it with permanence. In 2013, Miller pleaded guilty. In exchange, the death penalty is taken off the table. The judge sentences him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There is no dramatic verdict moment, no jury deliberation climax. The outcome is procedural, final. According to public records, Miller does not appeal the conviction. The legal process ends as quietly as the crime began. For the system, this is a resolution. For Hope's family, it is an ending that does not feel complete. No sentence can restore what was taken. No explanation offered in court answers the deeper question of why Hope Melton crossed paths with the wrong person at the wrong moment. The confession closes the case legally. Emotionally, it leaves space unfilled, because even with a name, a face, and a prison cell, the violence still feels uncontained, like something that could happen again. What remains after justice is delivered, but meaning is not. After the sentence is handed down, the courtroom empties. The case file closes. The system moves on. For Hope's family, time does not. According to public statements made in the years following the trial, her relatives describe a grief that arrives in waves. Not loud, not public, persistent. Hope is not a headline to them. She is a chair left empty. A phone number that no longer answers. A life that stopped mid-motion. There is no sense of triumph in the conviction. The man responsible will never walk free, but that certainty offers little relief. The violence was random. That fact lingers like an unresolved threat. If it could happen to Hope, it could happen to anyone. The atmosphere surrounding the case after sentencing is subdued. There are no rallies, no ongoing appeals, no media circus, just a quiet acknowledgement that a young woman's life ended violently on a road she had driven before without fear. Hope's family chooses remembrance over spectacle. According to interviews, they speak about her kindness, her reliability, the ordinariness of her plans. These details matter because they counter the way victims are often reduced to the moment of their death. Hope Melton is remembered for how she lived, not how she was taken. Law enforcement agencies reflect on the investigation as well. The case reinforces uncomfortable truths about rural vulnerability, long stretches of road, limited surveillance, the difficulty of responding quickly when a crime leaves no immediate trace. According to investigators, the successful resolution depended on persistence, video footage, and a suspect who eventually spoke. There is no warning sign that could have saved Hope Melton, no behavior she could have changed, no choice she could have made differently based on the evidence presented. That reality shifts responsibility away from the victim entirely, where it belongs. The aftermath is defined by absence, but also by resolve. Hope's name becomes part of local memory, not as a cautionary tale about mistakes, but as a reminder of how fragile safety can be. Her family carries forward without closure, but with clarity. They know what happened. They know who did it. What they cannot know is why this encounter occurred at all. And that unanswered question is where the case leaves the rest of us aware, unsettled, and forced to look at ordinary roads differently. What does justice mean when it arrives too late to matter to the person it was meant to protect? That evening, deputies drive to Ed's isolated farmhouse with a search warrant. It's dark, unlit, and wind moves through bare trees. They expect to find a missing woman, perhaps a body, perhaps evidence of violence. Ed's mother, Augusta Gein, ruled the household, a deeply religious woman, domineering and unyielding. She preached that the outside world was corrupt, that women were sinful by nature, that moral decay waited beyond the farm's borders. Ed and his older brother Henry were pulled from school early. Social contact was limited. Friendship was discouraged. Curiosity was punished. This is documented in interviews conducted after Ed Gein's arrest. Augusta controlled what her sons read, where they went, and what they believed. She framed obedience as virtue and fear as protection. Ed listened attentively, with complete concentration. The atmosphere in that house was not violent in the conventional sense. There were no reported beatings, no police calls. Instead, there was pressure constant, quiet, a worldview sealed tight, Investigators would later describe it as emotional confinement. Psychiatrists would describe it as dependency taken to an extreme. Ed reaches adulthood without leaving home. No career, no romantic relationships. He takes odd jobs and babysits for neighbors. He seems gentle but awkward. Years later, townspeople tell reporters he laughs too easily, avoids eye contact, and rarely speaks. In 1940, Henry Gein dies in a field fire under suspicious circumstances that are never prosecuted. 2 years later, Augusta suffers a stroke. Ed nurses her, sleeps nearby, and obeys her. When she died in 1945, he was still grieving. He preserves her room exactly as it was, seals it off, and keeps it dust-free and untouched. Investigators noted it. The farmhouse decayed, but Augusta's bedroom stayed untouched, a shrine, a line between past and present. After her death came not just grief but collapse. Psychiatrists later said Ed lost his only emotional anchor. Her rules didn't fade. In isolation, they grew louder and twisted. From then on, Ed Gein became increasingly nocturnal. He visited graveyards. He collected. He read anatomy texts and pulp magazines. The case file says no one intervened. No one connected the signs. A question haunts every later discovery. When the authority that shaped his reality disappeared, what filled the silence? Something did. It didn't come from outside Plainfield. Bernice Worden's disappearance begins not as a mystery but as a workplace anomaly. She opens the store and never closes it. By early afternoon on November 16, 1957, customers sense something is wrong. The lights are on, the door is unlocked, and no clerk stands behind the counter. Police reports note blood near the cash register, not enough to explain what happened, but enough to raise alarm. Before sunset, her son, Deputy Sheriff Frank Worden, arrives. He knows procedure and his mother's habits. She wouldn't leave town without notice or abandon her store. Within hours, he reports her missing. Tension spreads. This isn't a runaway or a misunderstanding. The blood changes everything. Investigators secure the scene and piece together her final hours, checking receipts, interviewing witnesses. One name keeps coming up: Ed Gein. The antifreeze receipt is real-time stamped and written in Ed's hand. Multiple witnesses confirm seeing him in the store that morning. According to the investigation file, there is no record of any other customer around that time. Ed does not flee. He does not hide. When deputies arrive at his farmhouse that evening, he is not home. They locate him later at a nearby grocery store, casually shopping. He is cooperative, calm. He offers no resistance when arrested. He asks no questions. That calm becomes part of the case record. Inside the hardware store, police note the absence of a struggle beyond the blood near the counter. No weapon is found, no signs of robbery. The cash drawer is open, but money remains. This was not theft. It was targeted. In Plainfield, concern gives way to something colder: fear without a name. In later interviews, neighbors revisit old moments, odd remarks, uneasy silences, nothing concrete. Only hindsight sharpening what once seemed trivial. As deputies ready a search warrant for Gein's farmhouse, the house sits on a neglected lot, windows dark, paint peeling. Officers recall the smell hitting first as they approach: stale, organic, impossible to place. They enter looking for Bernice Worden, and when the first flashlight beam cuts through the dark, the case stops being one missing woman and becomes something older and far more disturbing. The search begins methodically. Flashlights cut through the darkness. Floors are cluttered with debris. Newspapers are stacked in uneven piles. The farmhouse is cold, unheated. According to officer reports, silence dominates the interior, broken only by footsteps and breath. Then a deputy opens the door to a shed attached to the house. Hanging upside down from the rafters is the body of Bernice Worden. She has been dressed out and positioned like a hunted animal. The method mirrors techniques used in deer processing. Officers recognize it immediately. Several step back. One leaves the building to vomit. Radios crackle. Backup is called. The search expands. What began as a homicide scene becomes something else entirely. Inside the house, officers document objects they cannot yet categorize. Bowls made from human skulls, a lampshade fashioned from skin, masks, furniture upholstered with human remains. According to the investigation file, many items are later confirmed through forensic testing to be human in origin. Importantly, The evidence is not random. It is organized, stored, preserved. Some pieces are cleaned, some are labeled. This is not the work of a moment. It is accumulation over years. Despite the visual impact, investigators move carefully. They photograph everything, bag items, and secure the property. The farmhouse becomes a crime scene of national significance before the night ends. Ed Gein is brought in for questioning shortly afterward. He does not deny involvement. He does not express panic. According to interrogation transcripts, his tone is flat and cooperative. He answers questions directly, often without elaboration. He says he robbed graves, that the items came from dead women, and that he didn't kill most of them. He adds, Bernice Worden was different. She was alive when he took her. He says it flatly. In the interrogation room, the prevailing reaction isn't anger but disbelief. Investigators are trained for violence, not for its ritualized aftermath. As forensic teams comb the farmhouse, another truth emerges. There are more objects than bodies. Some remains are partial, others can't be identified. The timeline stretches back possibly decades. The focus shifts from what happened to Bernice Worden to a darker question. How long had Ed Gein been doing this unnoticed, unchallenged, living in plain sight? And if the whole town misses out on that, who else? As daylight reaches the farmhouse, the work becomes slower, more precise. Forensic teams catalog what can be measured, what can be tested, what can be proven. A confirmed fact emerges through autopsy reports and cemetery records. Most of the human remains found on Ed Gein's property did not come from murder. They came from graves. According to the investigation file, Gein targeted freshly buried bodies, middle-aged women, recently deceased, often those who resembled his mother in age or build. He waited until funerals passed, until the ground was quiet. Then he dug. Grave robbing takes patience, timing, and knowledge of burial routines. This was no impulse, it was quiet, deliberate planning. Forensics confirm the skulls, skin, and bones came from multiple people. Some can be traced to local cemeteries, others remain unidentified. Investigators cross-check missing person reports, hospital death records, and burial logs as the pattern comes into focus. Ed describes his actions without visible distress. Psychiatrists later note that he separates the act from its consequences. He says he wanted to make a woman's suit to feel close to his mother, not to harm or frighten anyone, and insists the dead did not mind. This is not a justification. It is a record. Investigators then face a classification problem. Many acts are clearly criminal, but few fit neatly into homicide statutes. Grave desecration, abuse of corpses, theft. The evidence carries a weight the era's legal language cannot match. Then another fact sharpens the case. Bernice Worden was not the first woman Ed killed. Mary Hogan, a tavern owner, disappeared in 1954. Her case had gone cold. No body was recovered. According to Ed Gein's later statements, he killed her during a visit to her bar. Her remains are never fully found, but partial evidence recovered from the farmhouse supports his confession. This was not a single break. It was a pattern interrupted by chance. Investigators now understand that the farmhouse is not merely a crime scene. It is an archive, each object a record of escalation, each act a rehearsal. The central question no longer focuses on what Ed did. It focuses on how the system had no mechanism to see him coming, because the deeper the investigation goes, the clearer it becomes. Ed Gein did not hide. He simply was not seen. The interrogation room is plain. A table, 2 chairs. No raised voices, no pressure tactics. According to official transcripts, Ed talks freely. He admits to killing Bernice Worden. He admits to killing Mary Hogan. He describes entering Worden's store with a rifle, shooting her once, transporting her body home. The sequence is direct, clinical, without embellishment. This is documented in police records and later court proceedings. What unsettles investigators is not what he says, but how he says it. There is no attempt to minimize, no effort to dramatize. When asked why, Gein does not describe anger or hatred. He describes compulsion, curiosity, a desire to possess something that would not leave. Tension grows. Each answer closes one question and opens another. Psychiatrists observe his speech patterns, affect, detachment from social meaning. According to their evaluations, Ed understands events, but not their moral weight. He claims he did not intend to kill Bernice Worden, that he panicked. This assertion is not officially confirmed and conflicts with physical evidence, including the presence of a loaded rifle and the positioning of the body. Investigators note the discrepancy but do not challenge him aggressively. The facts are already sufficient. Ed also describes how he used the remains taken from graves, processes, storage, cleaning. He does not describe pleasure. He describes purpose. This distinction is recorded in psychiatric notes as significant. Importantly, he does not confess to additional murders beyond Worden and Hogan. Despite rumors, no further homicides are substantiated. This restraint becomes crucial later, as myth begins to overtake evidence. Investigators now face a different task. The case is no longer about gathering proof. It is about determining whether Ed Gein can stand trial. Psychiatric evaluations are ordered. Multiple doctors examine him independently. Their conclusions align. Ed Gein is legally insane. He cannot distinguish right from wrong in a way that meets the standard for criminal responsibility. What remains is how the law will respond to a man who admits everything and understands almost nothing. The courtroom never fills with spectators expecting testimony. There is no opening statement, no cross-examination, no jury seated to weigh evidence. The Ed Gein case moves forward without the architecture of a traditional trial. For the Worden family, there is no verdict to mark an end. For the town of Plainfield, there is no public reckoning. The case resolves on paper, not in open court. Psychiatric evaluations continue for years. Doctors document delusions tied to identity confusion and maternal fixation. According to medical reports, Ed believed that women's bodies could be used, possessed, and modified to provide security. He is not found to be malingering. Multiple independent assessments reach the same conclusion. In 1968, a decade after his arrest, Ed is deemed competent to stand trial. By then, the case has aged, evidence has been stored, witnesses have moved on or died. Nonetheless, the legal process resumes. He pleads not guilty by reason of insanity. The trial is brief, clinical. The facts are not disputed. The defense does not attempt to reinterpret evidence. The prosecution does not seek spectacle. The jury deliberates for less than an hour. Ed Gein is found not guilty by reason of insanity for the murder of Bernice Worden. He is returned to state custody, this time to the Mendota Mental Health Institute. He remains institutionalized for the rest of his life. No parole hearings, no appeals that alter the outcome. The feeling left behind is not closure, it is suspension. Justice, in its conventional form, never arrives. Accountability is acknowledged, but punishment is redirected into containment. The farmhouse is burned years later, reportedly by an arsonist. Whether the act was intentional or symbolic is not officially confirmed. The physical center of the case disappears. What remains are records, photographs, transcripts, and a growing public fascination that begins to distort the facts. Because as the legal process ends quietly, something louder begins elsewhere. Ed Gein dies on July 26, 1984, at the age of 77. He has spent most of his adult life in state custody. According to medical records, his final years are marked by physical decline, not psychological change. There are no final confessions, no revelations withheld for decades. The facts of the case remain as they were when first documented. This is the final verified outcome. Almost immediately after Ed's arrest, the story begins to detach from the evidence. Journalists arrive. Books are written, details are exaggerated, crimes are added without proof. The number of victims grows in retellings, despite no forensic confirmation. The distinction between murder and grave robbery blurs in public memory. This distortion becomes one of the case's most enduring consequences. Ed's actions inspire fictional characters in films and novels. His name is rarely spoken in those adaptations, but the imagery remains. Masks, skin, rural isolation. These representations amplify horror while stripping context. The real victims, Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan, become footnotes in cultural shorthand. The fact remains, Ed Gein killed 2 women. He desecrated the dead. He was legally insane. These truths are sufficient. They do not require inflation. The case does, however, change investigative practice. Law enforcement begins to take behavioral warning signs more seriously. psychiatric profiling advances. The importance of forensic verification over rumor becomes clearer, though not always followed. For Plainfield, the legacy is quieter. According to later interviews, residents resist the town's association with the case. They remember Worden as a mother, Hogan as a business owner. They remember Ed as a man who was present, visible, and still profoundly misunderstood. The lingering feeling isn't just fear, but unease with how close it was. The realization that extreme deviance didn't come from outside, it lived nearby, spoke politely, and waited. What happens when isolation is mistaken for harmlessness? When oddness is excused because it is familiar? When no one looks closely because nothing has yet demanded attention? The Ed Gein case does not end with his death. It continues as a cautionary record, one that warns against myth-making and reminds us that truth, when carefully documented, is already unsettling enough. On March 24, 2013, Eliza Sherman followed her routine, arriving on time, doing exactly what she was supposed to do. She stood outside, waiting, just as she had been instructed. Nothing seemed wrong. Nothing seemed out of place. But why was she told to wait outside, at that exact location, at that precise moment? Minutes later, Eliza was found in a nearby alley, fatally stabbed. No robbery. No witnesses. No clear suspect. So what really happened in those few missing minutes? Was this a random act of violence in broad daylight, or was Eliza deliberately placed there by someone who knew her schedule? And if this wasn't random, then the most disturbing question isn't just who killed her, it's who made sure she would be there. On March 24, 2013, Eliza Sherman, a 53-year-old registered nurse and mother of 4, went to the Erie View Plaza complex in downtown Cleveland. She had a 10:30 a.m. meeting with her divorce attorney, Gregory Moore. The meeting location was communicated to her via text message. Eliza was in the middle of a complicated divorce, and crucial decisions and a hearing were coming up. She never entered the building. Moore texted her that he was running late and told her to wait outside. Surveillance and digital evidence confirmed she waited near the building, checking her phone. Minutes later, at approximately 11 a.m., Eliza was found in a nearby alley on East 9th Street. She had been stabbed multiple times and was pronounced dead at the hospital shortly after. There was no sign of forced abduction or a prolonged struggle. The attack was quick, targeted, and brutal. Investigators believe Eliza was lured to the location under the guise of a legitimate appointment. The timing of her arrival, the delay, and the location itself suggest a planned attack. Why was she told to wait outside, making her vulnerable? This wasn't random, it implied planning, coordination, and knowledge of her schedule. Someone knew she would be standing there, and everything happened within a very short time frame. Eliza was a dedicated nurse known for her methodical and attentive nature. She was rebuilding her life as she navigated the final stages of her divorce. Court records indicate there were financial and personal disputes that remained unresolved. Despite the divorce, her children were central to her life. She was described as protective and steady. There were no reports of her expressing fear for her safety or any known threats against her. Her life was becoming increasingly complex with work, legal obligations, and communications with her attorney all converging. On March 24th, she followed her schedule precisely, arriving at the designated location at the correct time, a detail that would become crucial to the investigation. Investigators found no evidence of risky behavior or connections to criminal activity. The focus quickly shifted to those within her personal and legal circles. The key question wasn't just who attacked her, but who knew where she would be at that specific time. Eliza was at a turning point in her life, with legal issues and changing relationships. It seemed she was losing control. Then, something specific happened during this period of transition. Was Eliza simply unlucky, or did someone who knew her well plan her movements? The alley was small, practical, and easy to miss. It was located on East 9th Street, near a busy downtown area, but didn't seem dangerous. Delivery trucks used it, and people sometimes walked through it. During the day, it looked like any other part of the city. However, on the morning of March 24, 2013, it became the site of a violent crime. Around 11 a.m., Eliza Sherman was found there, seriously injured. Medical and police records show she had been stabbed more than 10 times. The stabs were focused and precise. Nothing was stolen, and there was no sign of a struggle. The attack appeared quick, targeted, and purposeful. She was still alive when she was found. Emergency services arrived quickly and took her to MetroHealth Medical Center. Despite their efforts, she died shortly after arriving. The time between the attack and her death was very short, just minutes. Investigators started by looking at the facts of the scene. The attack's location, so close to where she was waiting, immediately narrowed the search. This wasn't a kidnapping or a crime that happened in multiple places. Whoever attacked her approached her near where she was supposed to meet someone. This detail was important. No one admitted to witnessing the attack. So her routine had access to her, or had a reason to hurt her. For Eliza Sherman, this group was specific but complicated. Her estranged husband was a central figure. Their divorce was ongoing, with unresolved legal disputes about finances, property, and the division of their shared assets. In many investigations, such circumstances immediately raise questions, but suspicion isn't proof. Investigators looked into his movements, alibi, and communications. According to the case records, nothing placed him at the scene. There was no direct evidence connecting him to the attack, and no strong inconsistencies that would lead to charges. The investigation into him remained open but unproven. Next, they focused on another important individual, Gregory Moore, the divorce attorney. He was the last person known to communicate with Eliza before she died. Text messages show he arranged the meeting that brought her to Erie View Plaza that morning. He told her to wait outside because he was running late. This decision, which was documented, left her vulnerable, alone, exposed, and stationary. Investigators began piecing together Moore's activities. They focused on these questions. Where was Moore between the scheduled meeting and the attack? Why was the office locked? Why did he delay the meeting? Initially, Moore claimed he overslept, causing him to miss the appointment. Investigators documented and accepted this explanation, given the case's uncertainties. However, doubts persisted. Moore's role wasn't minor, it was crucial. He arranged the meeting, controlled the timing, and was responsible for Eliza being outside the building at that specific time. Yet, in 2013, no direct evidence connected Moore or anyone else to the assault. There was no matching DNA, weapon found, or eyewitness account. The case remained unresolved, with suspicions existing but lacking solid evidence. Investigators saw a pattern, but couldn't draw a firm conclusion. Was the crime a result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, fueled by personal issues? Or was it a carefully planned act by someone who knew Eliza's life and schedule intimately? The answers weren't found at the crime scene. They were hidden in the data. With limited physical evidence, investigators turned to digital traces, things unseen at the scene. They examined phone records, messages, and timestamps. In modern investigations, this data often fills gaps in memory. In this case, it revealed a subtle and disturbing pattern. Eliza's phone became a key piece of the puzzle. According to records, her communication with Moore on March 24 was frequent and specific. He confirmed the meeting, acknowledged delays, and told her to wait outside. Each message narrowed the timeline, pinpointing her exact location. She wasn't wandering aimlessly. She was waiting exactly where instructed. Investigators simultaneously analyzed Moore's phone activity, looking at message times, device usage, and location data. What they found didn't directly contradict his story but revealed inconsistencies, gaps, and assumptions that lacked confirmation. Intent was also a question. Why ask a client to wait outside a locked office instead of rescheduling? Why continue communicating without arriving? Prosecutors later argued these decisions weren't accidental. They were part of a plan to put Eliza in a predictable and vulnerable position. Then there was the silence. No emergency call from her phone, no message suggesting trouble. The attack was swift and controlled. There was no digital trace of resistance, just silence. Investigators also reviewed surveillance footage, matching timestamps to phone activity. They tracked movements and analyzed routes. But again, the picture was incomplete. Someone approached her during a short period without leaving a clear digital footprint. That became significant. In a data-rich world, absence can indicate intent. The communication that led her there was documented, but the subsequent violence wasn't. This raised a critical question: was the attacker deliberately avoiding digital traces, or was their involvement hidden within them from the start? Time didn't provide answers. It only prolonged the uncertainty. In the months after March 2013, the investigation remained active but unresolved. Detectives followed leads, re-examined evidence, and interviewed people close to Eliza. However, no arrest was made, and no suspect was officially named. The case slowed down, not from lack of effort, but from lack of proof. The alley remained silent. Without a weapon, witness, or forensic evidence linking anyone to the crime, the case entered a difficult phase. It remained unsolved but never abandoned. For Eliza's family, the pain of her absence never faded. They persistently sought answers, making public appeals and cooperating with investigators. The constant uncertainty created its own kind of emotional burden. They believed, as they stated publicly over the years, that Eliza's case wasn't random and that someone knew what happened to her. Investigators shared this belief. However, belief isn't evidence. Over the years, new tools emerged, like advanced digital forensics and improved investigative techniques. Yet, the fundamental facts of the case remained the same: the timeline, the communications, and the unanswered question of who approached Eliza in her final moments. Gregory Moore remained in the background. He wasn't charged or publicly named as a suspect early on. His role as the last known person to contact Eliza remained in the file, but wasn't the main focus. His explanation wasn't challenged in court, and the investigation seemed to move past him, at least publicly. However, the case never felt completely resolved. The circumstances suggested a deliberate act due to the timing, location, and orchestration of that morning. These elements didn't diminish with time, they became more prominent. As the years passed, the case became a part of Cleveland's unsolved history, a reminder of how quickly a life can be disrupted and how answers can remain elusive. But cold cases can be re-examined. Sometimes, they simply wait. What happens when investigators revisit the same evidence, not with new facts, but with a fresh perspective on what was already there? For over a decade, the case remained unresolved. Then, it progressed. In 2024 to 2025, investigators and prosecutors in Cuyahoga County reopened the case with renewed focus. The evidence hadn't changed significantly, but its interpretation had. According to court documents and statements from prosecutors, attention returned to Gregory Moore, who had always been part of the timeline but never formally charged. This time, the focus was on the implications of the sequence of events, not just Moore's statements. Prosecutors began to reconstruct March 24, 2013, as a planned setup rather than a series of unconnected actions. The text messages, the delayed arrival, and the instruction for Eliza to wait outside a locked office all formed a pattern when viewed together. A pattern suggesting intent. According to the indictment, Moore was accused of creating the conditions that led to Eliza's death. He wasn't necessarily accused of the physical attack itself, but of facilitating it. The prosecution argued that he used the scheduled meeting to place her in a predictable location at a precise time, making her a target. The motive, as stated in court documents, was related to the divorce case. Eliza's legal proceedings were nearing a crucial hearing. Her testimony and its outcome could have had professional repercussions. The state's theory was that delaying or disrupting the process might have been the goal. However, as with all such claims, motive alone wasn't sufficient. Investigators highlighted inconsistencies in Moore's original statements, gaps in his timeline, and questions about his whereabouts that morning. Over time, these details, once inconclusive, gained significance under renewed scrutiny. Then came the charge. In 2025, Gregory Moore was formally arrested and indicted for Eliza Sherman's murder. This announcement marked the first major progress in over a decade. For the family, it meant a shift from silence to hope. In this case, it was a turning point. However, an arrest isn't a conclusion. It's the start of a new phase that requires proof, challenges, and examination in a courtroom. After years of waiting, the story had changed. But had the truth finally emerged, or was this just one interpretation of a story that remained incomplete? The courtroom doesn't erase time, it measures it. More than a decade after Eliza Sherman went to downtown Cleveland for a routine legal meeting, her case entered its final and most critical stage. Gregory Moore's arrest transformed the investigation into a legal battle, where the narrative becomes an argument and evidence is tested under oath. The long-established facts were no longer enough on their own. They needed to be interpreted. The prosecution argued that the attack was planned, not random. They claimed Moore, Eliza's lawyer, manipulated her by setting up a meeting, arriving late, and telling her to wait outside, where she could be easily attacked. They argued this was a deliberate setup. The defense countered that there was no solid proof. They pointed out the lack of a weapon, eyewitnesses placing Moore at the scene, or forensic evidence connecting him to the stabbing. They claimed suspicion had grown over time, but suspicion isn't enough to prove guilt. The case hinged on the question of a deliberate plan versus a lack of definitive evidence. The prosecution presented a seemingly planned sequence of events. The defense highlighted the unanswered questions. The time that had passed complicated the case. As memories faded, evidence deteriorated, and interpretations changed. For Eliza Sherman's family, the legal proceedings meant more than just a resolution. They sought acknowledgement and accountability for the events leading to her death, even if every detail couldn't be pinned down. Their grief was fueled by years of unanswered questions, which were now being addressed in court. However, some questions remained unanswered even as the case progressed. The identity of the attacker was still uncertain. It was unclear whether the plan was carried out alone or with help. The investigation file showed these details were not fully confirmed. The story had developed, but some aspects were still unresolved. In cases like this, justice is rarely complete. It's based on what can be proven, not on everything known or suspected. Eliza Sherman's story continues beyond her death, in the way the system responded, the delays, the relentless pursuit of justice, and the eventual focus on the evidence that was present from the start. Her life was cut short. Her case was delayed. The truth emerged gradually, under pressure, and over time. Ultimately, one question remains, not just about what happened, but about why it took so long to uncover the truth. If the evidence was always there, why did it take so many years to take action?